And you guys are good to go. All loss will be at 102. Sorry again for the delay, everyone, but have a good round.
Thank you, Elliot. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me all right? All right. Well, this is my first time conducting a trial like this, as I feel that it is many of yours. So let's make the most of it. Enjoy your time. If you're nervous about technical difficulties at all, I'm probably more nervous than you are, so don't worry about it. As we've just received the message to get started, let's call the case of the Estates of Genesis versus Harper Martini to order. I believe that's the correct parties, right? Counsel, am I correct in those? Scoring judge, please look to the two bottoms on the lower left of your screen and remember to keep your audio and video off unless you were told otherwise. You should also have your video set to hide all non-video participants, as do I. This means that only the people on the screen right now should be the advocates and me, which I believe we do have. Is there anything that we should take care of before attorneys make appearances? All right, well, both parties, could you make appearances for the record?
Your Honor, permission to make appearances before the court.
Please proceed.
Good morning. My name is Tanya Christou, and along with my co-counsel, Cole Hastings.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And Beau Marlette.
Good morning, Your Honor.
We will be representing the plaintiff in today's case, the Estates of Genesis Petrillo. Your Honor, prior to coming into trial today, you should have received all stipulations, rules of evidence, all relevant case law, and at this time, Your Honor, I would like to constructively tender these documents to the bench.
Consider them so tendered. Thank you, counsel.
Next, since this is our first time in Your Honor's virtual courtroom, would you like us to screen share exhibits prior to their admittance into evidence or after they have already been admitted?
Let's go ahead and do sort of a sharing beforehand so that I can review them, and then once I rule on whether they are admissible, we'll consider them, officially admitted or not.
Yes, Your Honor. Next, I would like to invoke Rule 608, the constructive swearing in of all witnesses. I would also like to invoke Rule 615, the constructive sequestration of all witnesses barring party representatives. Just for clarification, would Harper Martini prefer to go by the honorary mix? As in, when referring to Harper Martini, would you prefer for the plaintiff to refer to them as Ms., Mix, or Mr.?
Miss is okay.
Finally, I would like to point your attention to Stipulation 3, which states Exhibits 1 through 10 have been previously admitted to trial.
Counsel, let me pull up stipulations real quick on one of my 100 screens that I have open right now. All right, I see that they are pre-admitted. Also, under Rules 615 and 608, all witnesses will have been sequestered and previously sworn. And I have noted that we will be referring to Miss Martini as Ms. M.S. Dodd. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor. Nothing further.
Anything further? Defense?
Your Honor, may the defense also make our introductions at this time?
You may, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ava Sikowski, and I, along with my co-counsel, Thomas Azari.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And Sana Brooks.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Are representing the defendant in today's trial, Harper Martini. Your Honor, before we proceed to opening statements, we also have some pretrial matters we'd like to attend to. In regards to Rule 615, the defense would like to make clear that we designate Harper Martini as our representative. And although the defendant will be present throughout today's trial, her camera will be turned off until she is called to testify.
So noted. Thank you, counsel.
Your Honor, during statements, should we refer to you as both judge and jury?
Yes, because of the construction right now, I believe that it would be impossible to refer the scoring judge as jury and me only as judge. So we'll constructively have both.
Do you have a copy of today's trial?
Counsel, when you say today's trial, what do you mean?
Do you have a copy of the trial in front of you with the exhibits and the affidavits?
I do,
All right.
counsel. Yes, I have a whole drive pulled up. Is there anything specifically you'd like me to refer to?
No, just to make sure that when sharing exhibits, you are known what we are talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Appreciate that. Thank you, counsel. Anything further from the defense?
Yes, and due to the nature of this trial, if anyone comes across any technological or audiovisual issues, for instance, the internet cuts out or they have trouble hearing, how would you like us to proceed?
Is there, counsel, a typical way that we handle those sorts of things that have been considered best practice?
The counsel would suggest to either give a moment to the witness to make sure that they can come back on. And if they can't, we can perhaps have someone fill in for them.
That sounds appropriate to me. Plaintiff's counsel, do you agree?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, then we'll work that way, and hopefully we won't have any issues with that. Although my Wi-Fi does go out quite a bit in Zoom meetings as well, so we'll see what happens.
Right. Well, thank you, Your Honor. The defense is ready to go.
Absolutely. Plaintiffs, anything further?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right. Does anyone need any further time for technical purposes before we proceed to openings, or should we proceed?
We can proceed to openings, Your Honor.
All right, let me check with my fellow judge. Judge Mason, are you ready to proceed to opening statements?
I am.
All right. Well, then let us proceed.
Opening for the defense, Your Honor. Excuse me, the plaintiff.
You may proceed.
Thank you. May it please the court, Your Honor, members of the jury. We are here today because Harper Martini reached their boiling point. And when they reached their boiling point, a young man, Genesis Petrillo, lost his life. All Genesis wanted to do was to get married to the love of his life, the daughter of Harper, Casey Soto. But what you'll hear today is that Harper wouldn't have that. Harper couldn't stand the idea of their only child being taken away from them, and taken away by someone they hated, by someone they considered a pest, and a pest they wanted and they needed to get rid of. Now, Genesis and his fiancée, Casey, were looking forward to getting married at the Rosie and Pedro winery, where they first laid eyes on each other. And after getting married, they planned to move abroad. But what you'll hear today is that Harper wouldn't have that. Instead, they forced both Casey and Genesis to have their wedding at their own winery so that they could have control over every aspect of the planning. But what you'll also hear today is that Genesis wouldn't give that control to Harper. And so the fights ensued. And whether it was over a choice of decoration for the wedding or the way in which Casey should live her life, things got tense between Harper and Genesis. With every fight and with every snide comment, things escalated between them until it got to the point of no return. And you'll hear that all of this conflict culminated in a single event, the rehearsal dinner, the boiling point. You'll learn that after the toast, Harper offered a bottle of wine to Genesis. But this was a special bottle of wine. What poor Genesis didn't know is that the special ingredient in this particular bottle of wine was poison, and that drinking it would be the end of his life altogether. Because when Harper reached their boiling point, Genesis paid the price. And that is why we, the plaintiff, are making a claim of battery against Harper Martini. What this means is we must prove to you that it is more likely than not that several elements are true. Now, the first of these elements is that Harper Martini intentionally mixed pesticide in the Cara bottle of wine. Second, that when Harper poisoned this wine, they intended to cause harm to Genesis. And lastly, that when Genesis drank this bottle of wine, he died because of it. In order to prove these elements to you today, we will be calling 3 witnesses to the stand. The first of these witnesses will be Angel Rodriguez, a close friend of Genesis. Now you'll hear from Angel about the fights that would happen between Harper and Genesis, and about a particular argument that happened on the night of the rehearsal dinner itself. You'll also hear from Angel that he saw no one else drinking that particular bottle of wine, aside from the one sip that he had himself, but that he spit out because it immediately tasted funny to him. Now next, we will be calling Dr. Jameen Kwan to the stand, the Chief of Medical Emergency Services at River Valley Roads Hospital. And what you'll hear from Dr. Kwan is that he was the doctor attending to Genesis that particular night. And that while Genesis initially showed symptoms of alcohol poisoning, when these symptoms escalated, he was able to determine that this was something else entirely, that this was organophosphate poisoning. And that when he ran tests on the body of Genesis and the contents of his stomach, he learned that his suspicions were confirmed and his diagnosis was correct. Now, lastly, we will be calling Sam Arnold to the stand, who was the caterer of the wedding. And what you'll hear from Sam Arnold is more about that tense relationship between Harper and Genesis. And you'll learn that Harper specifically reserved the Cara bottle of wine only to be consumed by Genesis, and how Harper said this was something that would take care of their problems forever. You will also hear that Sam saw a bottle of insecticide in the kitchen, and when she asked Harper about it, they replied it was there to kill pests like Genesis. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we will prove to you that Harper poisoned Genesis. And we will show you today that Harper reached their boiling point. And that is why at the conclusion of today's trial, we will come up here and ask that you find the only justifiable verdict and that you find Harper liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Defense, opening statement.
Yes, Your Honor. Also, I'll be having my timekeeper present just for me.
Absolutely, that's fine.
May it please the court. Not every tragedy has a villain. This is Harper Martini. She's the proud owner of Peony Estates, one of the best wineries in all of Midlands. But most importantly, she's a mother who raised her daughter on her own, a mother who loved their daughter to the moon and back, a mother who would do anything to make her daughter happy. But that's not what the plaintiff wants you to see. They want you to believe that Miss Martini would intentionally poison the person her daughter loved deeply. They want you to believe that Miss Martini would intentionally hurt the person she loves the most and, excuse me, and intentionally ruin her business at the same time. That's because they want you to see Miss Martini as the villain. But not every tragedy has a villain. Members of the jury, Miss Hastings just came up here and told you Miss Martini reached her boiling point. But she can't just say that. She can't just come up here and tell you a story. No, she has to prove it. Because the plaintiff and the plaintiff alone has the burden of proof in today's case. And it's their job to prove each and every element by preponderance of the evidence. This is a battery case. That means that the plaintiff has to prove that it was more likely than not that Harper Martini acted with the intent to harm Genesis Petrillo and by putting pesticides in his drink, and which resulted in his death. But members of the jury, the plaintiff will fail to meet that burden. Because what you're going to find out today is that not one witness in today's trial will be able to tell you that they saw Miss Martini do what the plaintiff claims. That's because it didn't happen. Now, we as the defense don't have a burden to prove, but you will still hear from 3 of our witnesses. First, you'll hear from Dr. Cannon, an associate consultant who reviewed Dr. Kwan's findings. He'll tell you that the wine may not have been the source of pesticides. And he'll also tell you that Mr. Petrillo's death may have been due to liver disease. Next, you'll hear from Casey Soto, Miss Martini's own daughter. She'll tell you what her mother is really like. And she'll tell you that her mother would never poison Mr. Petrillo. And finally, you'll hear from Harper Martini. She's gonna get on that stand and tell you what nobody else can tell you. She's gonna tell you exactly what happened. She'll tell you about the wedding planning process and the night of the rehearsal dinner. But most importantly, she'll tell you that she didn't poison Mr. Petrillo. And at the end of today's trial, when the plaintiff can't prove who the villain was in today's case, my co-counsel, Mr. Thomas Azari, will come before you to review the evidence and the testimony presented and ask you to find the only verdict supported by the evidence. He will ask you to find Miss Martini not liable for battery. Thank you.
Thank you to both counsels. And just as a point of order for my reference, counsel, I do note that we are only pursuing one cause of action by the plaintiffs, and that would be battery against Harper Martini. Is that correct, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Is there anything further that we need to cover before proceeding into the plaintiff's case in chief? All right, you may proceed, counsel.
Your Honor, the plaintiff calls our first witness to the stand. Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hello, my name is Angel Rodriguez.
Mr. Rodriguez, what do you do for a living?
I am a kindergarten teacher at Rapid River Valley Elementary School here in Midlands.
And how are you involved in this case?
Well, Genesis was one of my best friends, and I was also the one who called 911 for him when he was sick. And I had to tell Casey about Genesis falling into a coma, which was the worst day of my life.
Mr. Rodriguez, now, I know this is hard for you, but let's talk about June 7th, 2019. What happened that day?
Well, June 7th was the rehearsal dinner and also the night that Genesis passed away.
Did you see Genesis that day?
Yeah, I was with Genesis the majority of the night, and Genesis even sat next to me during the rehearsal dinner because of a little fight that he was having with Casey.
What was that fight about?
Well, it was more so a fight between Genesis and Harper. Harper had told Genesis that he should just leave and save this family the headache. Yeah.
Did anything else happen between Harper and Genesis before the rehearsal dinner?
Well, yeah. So Genesis was, worried about the comment that Harper made. So he went up to Harper to, talk to them about it. But Harper pulled Genesis into the hallway. And after Genesis came back, I asked him what had happened. But Genesis said that I should keep away from Harper. And then Genesis also said that I think Harper might kill me.
How did Genesis react to Harper's threat?
Well, Genesis was not smiling, and his eyes were wide open. And I could tell that he was afraid of Harper by the end of the rehearsal dinner.
Did you see Harper at any time before the dinner?
Yeah. So I was walking around in the hallways when I saw Harper walking towards the direction of the kitchen. But I saw Harper holding a canister labeled pesticides. So, I asked Harper what they were doing with them.
What did Harper say?
Well, I think my question kind of frazzled Harper at first because, Harper hesitated. But then they said that the pesticides are for Genesis because Genesis is such a pest. Just kidding. Lewis claimed there was a cockroach. I'm going to go deal with it. You can go back to the dinner. And then Harper walked away.
Mr. Rodriguez, allow me to direct your attention back to the rehearsal dinner. Was Miss Petrillo drinking that day?
Genesis wasn't really drinking, which was kind of weird. I saw him have a couple sips of champagne, but I've been drinking with Genesis for a while, and I was expecting him to, drink a lot more because it was the night before his wedding, but he wasn't. And I was kind of worried, so I asked him about it, but he just shrugged me off, and it looked like something was bothering him. I just assumed it was the fight with Harper.
What happened next?
Speeches were next, and Harper gave a really mean speech where they called Genesis a problem child and made a lot of mean jokes about Genesis. And, Harper was kind of being a bully. But no one was laughing, especially not Genesis.
How did Genesis react to this?
Well, Harper had just insulted him in front of his closest friends and family. How do you think he would react? I looked over at him, but he was shaking under the table.
And what happened at 10 o'clock that evening?
So at 10, Harper gave Genesis a bottle of Caro wine. And Harper also gave the rest of the guests one.
Did you also receive a bottle of Caro wine?
No, I received a bottle of Horizon wine, as did everyone else except Genesis. He got the only bottle of Caro.
Did you see Genesis drink the Caro wine?
Yeah, I saw Genesis have a few glasses of it. He also offered it to everyone at the table, but no one accepted but me. And usually, I like wine, but the Caro wine had a funny taste to it, and it didn't sit well with me. So before I swallowed it, I spat it out.
Did Genesis drink a lot of this Caro wine?
Like I said, she had a couple glasses, but she was acting really drunk, drunker than she, should have, drunker than she should have been based on how many glasses she actually had.
What do you mean by that, Mr. Rodriguez?
So Genesis, only had a couple glasses, but like I said, he was acting really drunk. And he even told me that this is a type of feeling I've never felt before. I was worried about Genesis, especially because I've seen Genesis drink whole bottles of wine before and not even get a hangover the next day. So yeah, I was pretty worried about him.
Did you see Genesis consume any other alcohol?
Not really. Genesis ordered tequila shots for a small group of us, but I didn't see him have any of those. So no, I only saw him drink the Caro wine.
What did you do next?
Well, a little bit later, I was looking over at Genesis, but he was completely tapped out. So I went over to check on him, but I didn't smell any tequila or any other alcohol on his breath, which, worried me. So I decided to take him up to his room to rest.
What was Genesis's condition in the hotel room?
He got bad really fast. It took us like 30 minutes to get up to the room, and he was constantly vomiting. I tried giving him water, but he would just throw it up. Eventually, he got so bad that, he asked me to call 911, so I did.
What happened once the EMS took him to the hospital?
I don't really remember. The sirens were really loud, and I just remember holding Genesis's hand. Once we got to the hospital, the doctor told me that Genesis had fallen into a coma and that he had been poisoned. So, I knew I had to tell Casey, so I went back to the winery.
What happened next?
Well, so I got back to the winery and I was going to go tell Casey, but before I got the chance to, Harper bumped into me. And before I, said anything, Harper said, "Genesis got poisoned? Oh no, we'll have to cancel the wedding. Go tell Casey. Casey needs to know."
Did you share your concerns about Genesis' condition with anyone before calling 911?
No, I was the only one with Genesis when I called 911, and I didn't tell anyone that I did call 911.
And you were the only one who went to the hospital with Genesis.
Yeah, I was the only one with her the entire time.
Mr. Rodriguez, let's circle back. How did you meet Genesis?
So I met Genesis and Casey in 2016 through a mutual friend, and we became friends instantly. Genesis and Casey were a sweet couple and genuine people, and Genesis especially had the ability to make anyone feel welcomed and important.
What was Miss Soto and Mr. Petrio's relationship like?
The two were inseparable. They were great together, and I just really wish they could have lived out their dream together.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's talk about June 7th. On June 7th, you claimed that the tensions were high between Mr. Petrillo and Miss Martini, right?
Yes, they were.
You claimed that they were arguing a lot.
Yeah, all the time.
At one point, Mr. Petrillo told you that he was afraid that Miss Martini would do something to him.
Yeah, he was afraid that Harper was going to kill him.
You claimed that it was clear Genesis was scared of Harper.
Yes.
Well, you didn't tell anybody about this, right?
No, I didn't feel the need to. I just thought it would all roll over, but it didn't.
You didn't tell your friend Drew about this?
No.
You didn't tell Miss Soto about this?
No, I didn't want to worry her before her wedding. That wouldn't have been nice of me.
You claim that you didn't tell anybody because you weren't, but even though Mr. Petrillo was fearful for his life, you didn't think to call it the police?
No, I didn't have any reason to until, he actually died.
Well, later that night, you noticed that Mr. Petrillo received a different bottle of wine from you.
Yes, the only bottle of Cara wine.
It was named Cara.
Correct.
You noticed that Mr. Petrillo had several glasses of wine from Cara, right?
Yes.
Seeing Mr. Petrillo drink that much was normal to you, right?
Yes, he's drank a lot more before and not even gotten, very drunk.
You've been drinking with him for years.
Correct.
So when Mr. Petrillo was acting the way he was after drinking the wine, you were concerned.
Oh, yeah, because, he hadn't had that much, but he was acting extremely out of it. I was, definitely worried.
He was stumbling.
Yes.
Slurring.
Yes.
On direct examination, Mr. Petrillo told you this was the type of feeling he has never felt before.
Yes, which was weird because, he's gotten drunk a lot before, but to never have that feeling struck me as extremely odd.
Mr. Rodriguez, you were concerned, right?
Of course.
Yet despite how concerned you were, you didn't think to tell anybody about Mr. Petrillo's condition?
Well, I eventually called 911 about his condition.
But at that moment, you didn't think to tell anybody?
No.
It was only after Mr. Petrillo told you to call 911. That's when you did it?
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez, I want to be very clear about what you saw and didn't see on June 7th. You claimed you saw Miss Martini with a canister of pesticides, right?
Yes, I did. And then she said it was for pests like Genesis, but played it off as a joke.
Well, to be clear, you didn't see her holding a bottle of wine while she was holding the pesticides, right?
No, I just saw her heading towards the kitchen when she was holding the pesticide.
You didn't see her near any bottles of wine?
No.
You didn't see Miss Martini put pesticides in the bottle of wine?
No.
You can't tell me if the pesticide she was holding ended up in the bottle of the wine?
No, I wasn't with her when she could have put the pesticides in the wine.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Any redirect examination, counsel?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. You are excused. Would the plaintiff like to call their second witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff now calls Dr. Jameen Kwan to the stand. Would you please introduce yourself for the court?
Hi, my name is Jameen Kwan, but you can just call me Jim.
What's your educational background?
Yeah, so I first went to Georgia Tech and I majored in biology and chemistry. And then I went to med school at UNC Chapel Hill, go Heels. And finally, I went to Emory University for my residency.
What did you do after your residency?
Well, you see, I think learning is really a lifelong pursuit. So I went and did my fellowship also at Emory in the field of medical toxicology.
What do you do for a living right now?
Right now, I am a chief emergency room physician at a River Valley Hospital right here in the Midlands.
Do you have any specializations within your work?
Yes, medical toxicology.
Have you published any work on medical toxicology or emergency medicine?
Yes, I've published multiple articles, and you can find those in my CV.
Now that we've talked a little bit about your educational background, I want to move on to what it is that you actually do. Could you please walk us through what a typical day looks like for you?
Yeah, I mean, a typical day is a real whirlwind. So I'm a doctor, of course, so I have multiple patients that come in and I have to treat them, diagnose them, and make sure they feel better. And then I'm also the chief physician. So I have doctors that work under me, as well as nurses and pretty much everybody else in the hospital. So I have to watch over them as well.
Do you use any sort of methodology when you're diagnosing patients that come into the ER?
Yes, I do.
And what methodology is that?
Yes, it's called EXAD. It stands for Examination, Analysis, and Diagnosis.
And is this EXAD method common for other physicians in your field to use?
Yes, it's used around the world and it's really considered the gold standard.
Could you walk us through the components of this method, please?
Yeah, so the first step is an examination, and that's right when the patient walks in, and that's really right when you lay your eyes on them. So you look for visible symptoms such as, is their arm broken or something? Like, is their arm out of place? Things of that nature.
What happens in the next step, the analysis step?
Yeah, so the next step is analysis, and that's where you really start to dig deep into the science and get to things that you can't see with your eyes. So you order reports, like a toxicology report, a toxicology screen, something like that.
What happens in the final step?
Yeah, that final step is where you really combine the first two steps. So you're seeing the test results and what you can see with your eyes, and you're making a diagnosis and then, starting a treatment path to hopefully get the patient on the path to the recovery.
Now, I want to move on and talk about how you became involved in today's case. How did you come in contact with Genesis Petrillo?
Yeah, his friend brought him into the emergency room.
Before we get into the details of that interaction, I just want to clarify, did you use this EXAD methodology when you were treating Genesis?
Absolutely. I always use the EXAD method.
Now, shifting to the case itself, how did you perform the examination stage with Genesis?
Objection, Your Honor. Can I be heard?
You may.
Under Rule 702, Your Honor, I assume you have that in front of you. You have the Midlands Rules of Evidence in front of you. If you look at Rule 702, it says that an expert can only be qualified to testify in their expert opinion if they meet all four prongs of that rule. Now, it's the objection to this witness testifying on their expert opinion is because they haven't laid all four of those prongs, specifically B and D. We don't know whether or not Dr. Kwan's analysis was based on sufficient facts or data, and we don't know whether or not he reliably applied that EXAD method to the facts of this case.
Counsel response?
Yes, Your Honor. As to prong B of 702, this was based on sufficient facts and data. As Dr. Kwan has testified, he was the treatment physician in the emergency room that evening, and he was diagnosing Genesis. And he testified to the components of this method and how you're taking someone's physical symptoms and then running lab tests, and how he did that in Genesis's case. And as to prong D, that it was reliably applied, we will go to show that, if I may proffer.
You may.
Dr. Kwan did reliably apply this method in his case, and he will go through the specifics of what he observed, both in Genesis's physical state and then the test that he ran.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Well, first, counsel, I think that we've already resolved prong D. It sounds like counsel has admitted that they have not, in fact, laid the necessary foundation. So I'll make a partial ruling and say that that foundation will have to be laid, that there was reliability. Now, I do understand that that could come out through the testimony of the opinion. So we'll deal with that in a second. But I will sustain the objection in part on that. Counsel, I'll give you a chance to respond to the sufficient facts or data, because I would be interested to hear what your opinion is on why we have not heard and what specific facts or data that you may proffer.
Yes, Your Honor. And I completely agree with your ruling on prong D. Just so long as they lay that foundation before they go into their opinions, we have no issue. As to prong D, the expert has to testify specifically that their analysis was based on sufficient facts or data. It's not enough for Ms. Hastings to just tell you that right now. The witness has to tell you that over the course of his testimony. He hasn't done that yet, and until he does that, we don't know whether or not those facts and data were sufficient. We just know that they had facts and data, not whether they were enough.
So, counsel, one second, counsel. So what about the, actually, I'll give you a chance to respond first, then I'll ask my question.
Your Honor, at this time, the question I was listening was, how did you perform the examination stage in Genesis's case? Dr. Kwan has yet to assert an expert opinion, but more was going to actually lay that foundation based on the question. He was going to detail the symptoms in which he observed with Genesis, the interaction he had talking to Angel about those symptoms, and then what he decided to do based on those symptoms. Therefore, at this time, we're not asserting any opinion, but we're actually laying that foundation to show you.
May I be heard on that, Your Honor?
You may, counsel.
Your Honor, the witness cannot say that they observed a symptom of anything until they're admitted as an expert in that field. A lay witness can't say, I see bumps on somebody's skin, and therefore that is this kind of disease. That's something that only an expert can do. And in order for the expert to be able to do that, they have to lay those two prongs of 702 before they go into any symptom diagnosis or anything of the sort.
Counsel, I think that I'm going to tend to agree with plaintiff's counsel that your objection is a bit premature, that we are still laying the foundation in that stage. I don't think the question itself calls for any sort of inadmissible expert testimony yet. However, if he does sort of make an official diagnosis, which would be a conclusion under 702, then I believe that we can re-raise that objection. So for now, I'm going to put your objection on hold, but it is noted on the court. I'm going to be looking for that necessary foundation, counsel, as you have promised, plaintiff's counsel. So let's proceed. Overruled for now, but you may re-raise.
Just one question, Your Honor. Can we assume that any of the symptoms that Dr. Kwan testifies to right now regarding Genesis Petrio's condition are not made under an expert opinion?
Counsel, I will say that yes, as of right now, we're going to basically assume that all of these are 701 testimony as to just observations of symptoms. So when he goes from observation to a conclusory statement that this is some sort of disease or whatever medical opinion, that would dive into our 702 realm, and I would be happy to hear further discussion on whether or not that foundation has been laid. For now, I believe we're in 701 territory, so let's continue, counsel.
That's clear. Thank you, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Kwan, I want to take a step back and just ask you, what kind of facts and data did you use when you were looking at Genesis?
Yes, well, first I used my years and years of experience as an emergency room physician, as well as a toxins analysis and a blood alcohol content analysis.
And would you say that you reliably applied the XED method in Genesis' case?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, shifting, how did you perform the examination stage with Genesis?
Yes, so that's when I first laid eyes on Genesis. So when he first came into the ER, he had nausea, vomiting, slurred speech, and trouble walking.
So what did you decide to do next at this point?
Well, at that point, I ordered a blood alcohol content test because it really, to me, seemed like it was a case of alcohol poisoning.
And did Genesis display any other symptoms?
Yes, that's where more symptoms started to flare up, where I had a feeling in my stomach that this was not, in fact, alcohol poisoning.
And you say you had a feeling that it wasn't alcohol poisoning. What indicated to you that it wasn't alcohol poisoning?
Yes. So the first couple symptoms that I just said are symptoms of alcohol poisoning, but then the symptoms diverged in a way to the point where Genesis was showing contracted pupils. So her pupils were really tight, and usually they're dilated if it's a case of alcohol poisoning. Also, her eyes were tearing, and then she had muscle spasms too, which is certainly not a symptom of alcohol poisoning.
Well, if Genesis wasn't suffering from alcohol poisoning, then what was it that you thought might be the case?
I thought it was a case of organophosphate pesticide poisoning.
And what exactly is organophosphate pesticide?
Yeah, organophosphate pesticide is an insecticide. So it's meant to kill bugs off plants, which means, easily if it's ingested or put into close contact with the body, it's going to cause negative results.
And how can humans come in contact with this type of pesticide?
Yeah, there's 3 different methods. So there's inhalation where they breathe it in. There's a skin-to-skin contact where it touches the skin. And then the third is ingestion where they swallow it.
Did you have any way of knowing or of finding out how Genesis in particular could have come into contact with organophosphate?
Yes, there was no rashes or anything of the sort. So I could rule out skin-to-skin contact. And then given the time frame, it had to have been ingestion.
And were Genesis's symptoms consistent with someone who had ingested this type of poison?
Yes, they were.
And did these symptoms escalate at any point?
Yes, they did. Towards the end, he was even experiencing a bronchospasms, which is like wheezing. So you're really trying to breathe, but you just can't because your airways are closing.
As these symptoms were escalating, did you decide to administer any treatment?
Yes, at that point, I was so worried for his health that I administered the organophosphate antidote.
What happened after that?
Unfortunately, his symptoms just progressed too far and it wasn't enough. And he fell into coma and then eventually passed away.
What did you do after he passed away?
Well, obviously, it's horrible to lose a patient, but I went right back into it and tried to find a conclusive diagnosis to give his family some answers.
When you say you tried to find a conclusive diagnosis, is this when you would say you moved into your diagnosis step?
Yes, it is.
What happened at this point?
Well, at that point, I got multiple tests back, including the toxicology analysis.
What did these tests show you?
Yes, so first there was an acetylcholinesterase test, and that measures the levels of acetylcholine in the plasma, because see, you can't test directly for organophosphate poisoning. It gets broken down in the liver too fast. But scientists have concluded that high levels of acetylcholine low levels of acetylcholine lead to high levels of organophosphate pesticide. And that's what Genesis had.
And did you learn any information about Genesis's BAC?
Yes, the BAC test came back, and it came back at a 0.16, which means that Genesis was certainly intoxicated, but in my entire career, I've never seen anybody die of a BAC less than 0.22, and normally it has to be higher than a 0.25.
Do you have any knowledge of how alcohol interacts with organophosphate?
Yes, negatively, because you see, too much alcohol is bad, and being poisoned is bad. So they combine to make it doubly bad.
And were you able to come to a final diagnosis of Genesis?
Yes, my final diagnosis was that Genesis passed away from organophosphate pesticide poisoning based off of the wine he drank that night.
And just to be clear for the jury, were you able to locate the specific source of this poisoning?
Yes, my apologies. I jumped ahead of you a little bit. It was the wine that he drank that night.
Thank you, Your Honor. We have no further questions at this time.
Thank you, counsel. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may, counsel.
Good morning, Dr. Kwan.
Good morning.
Before you came to court today, you wrote a report on your findings related to this case, right?
Yes.
all of the facts that you're aware of regarding this case are written in that report.
Yes, and they're attached to separate, analyses and things of that manner.
All of the conclusions that you've made regarding this case are also in that report.
Yes,
You concluded that Genesis Petrillo died from pesticide poisoning, right?
yes,
The specific type of pesticides that you concluded he died from were organophosphate pesticides, right?
yes.
I want to talk about what you can tell us based on your observations leading up to and after Genesis Petrillo's death, okay?
Yes,
When Mr. Petrillo came into the hospital, you conducted an initial examination of his condition, right?
yes, I did.
Based on his symptoms at the time of your initial examination, you thought it was likely he had ingested some amount of pesticides before coming to the hospital.
How do you mean? Are you talking about the first part of my examination or after the second part of symptoms started flaring up?
Well, after you saw his symptoms, so I guess the second part, doctor, you thought it was likely he had ingested some amount of pesticides.
Yes,
After confirming those symptoms, you administered an antidote, right?
yes, I did.
That was an antidote to organophosphate pesticides, right?
Yes, it was.
But Mr. Petrillo died anyway.
Unfortunately, the medication was administered too late to help him.
After he died, you got 2 test results back, right?
Yes, I did.
Based on those test results, you learned that Mr. Petrillo had a blood alcohol content of 0.16%, right?
Yeah. Yes, I did.
You also learned that he had some amount of organophosphate pesticides in his digestive tract.
Yes, I did.
After confirming those results, you concluded that Mr. Petrillo had died as a result of pesticide poisoning.
Yes, given the low acetylcholinesterase levels, which correspond to a high probability of organophosphate poisoning, I did.
I want to talk about what you can't tell us based on those observations. Even though you know that Mr. Petrillo had organophosphate pesticides in his system, you can't tell us when he ingested that pesticide, can you?
Well, obviously, given the time of his symptoms, it was probably before he came, but yes.
You don't know if he had ingested it on the night before or in the morning, right?
How do you mean?
Well, sir, you don't know when those pesticides got into his body, right?
I cannot tell you the specific hour or minute, yes.
Even though you ran tests on his body contents, you can't tell us how much organophosphate pesticides were in his system, right?
No, yes, I cannot tell you. As I told you before, it undergoes rapid hydrolysis in the liver, so you
You
can't.
can't tell us if it was an ounce or a whole cup, right?
No, but even the littlest bit of organophosphate pesticide poisoning can be deadly to a person.
That's a no to my question that you don't know whether or not it was an ounce or a whole cup.
No, I don't, but any amount is terrible for the human body.
You can't tell us how he ingested those pesticides, can you?
The analysis came back on the wine that said there was organophosphate pesticides in the wine.
Well, you'd agree with me that you don't know whether if it was in his wine or his food, right?
Well, I can tell you that the wine had traces of organophosphate pesticides in it.
Well, let's talk about that wine that you're mentioning for a moment. The wine that you're talking about that you analyzed was in Genesis Petrillo's stomach, right?
Yes.
That wine was also mixed with some food, right?
I do not recall any food being in the stomach. So I have the wine to go off of, which has the organophosphate pesticide poisoning in it. And in my view, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
I just want to be very clear, doctor. It's your testimony today that you didn't find any evidence of food in Genesis Petrillo's stomach when you examined him?
It was mostly wine, as confirmed by the purple color of her vomit.
I just want to be clear, sir. Is it mostly or is it totally? Because those are two different things.
Pretty close to totally, but mostly.
So there were traces of food in his body.
Yes, a little bit.
So back to my earlier question. You're not sure whether or not it was the food or the wine, correct?
What I can tell you, counsel, is that the wine from her stomach had organophosphate pesticide poisoning in it. But yes.
Well, let's keep moving, doctor. Let's say they were in his food. You can't tell us when those phosphates may have gotten on that food, right?
No, but I can tell you that it was probably from the wine.
Let's talk about the wine. If the pesticides were in the wine, you can't tell us when it was put in that wine.
No.
You can't tell us if it was before or after it was bottled.
I wasn't making the wine. I can't help you with that one.
That's a no, sir. You can't tell us if it was before or after it was bottled.
No, I can't.
You can't tell us if it was if he ingested the pesticide on purpose or on accident, right?
I can't speak to his mental state now.
You can't tell us if those pesticides were put in his food by another person.
Counsel, I can only tell you from the time that I saw Genesis, which is at the hospital. Anything before that, I can't tell you anything. I apologize.
That's a no to my question.
No.
That you can't tell us whether or not those pesticides were put in his food by another person.
Objection, Your Honor.
Yes, counsel.
As to lack of personal knowledge, at this time, opposing counsel is repetitively asking Dr. Kwan to testify to matters that he has no personal knowledge of, and he has established that it is not within the scope of his testimony.
May I respond?
Are you, one second, counsel. Are you objecting to ask an answer to this question specifically, or are you preemptively objecting because you believe he's going to go on asking more things that he has no knowledge of?
Asked and answered, Your Honor. This line of questioning is repetitive and continuously asks the witness to respond to matters of which he has no knowledge, and he has testified many times that he has no knowledge of these events.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may, counsel.
That's exactly the point. The plaintiff brought this doctor before the court today and is trying to say that the food and the wine, the wine specifically, within Genesis Petrillo's stomach was poisoned, and that poison came from Harper Martini. Now, we're going directly to that claim, and it's perfectly admissible for me to ask this doctor exactly what he knows and what he doesn't know.
So I will sustain to the asked and answered. I believe that we do have on the record that he does not know who could have put anything anywhere during the events of these occurrences. So I will sustain as to asked and answered. The question will be stricken from the record. Counsel, I'm going to give you a very narrow leeway to continue. But plaintiff's counsel, if this becomes cumulative to a degree, please re-object, and I will sustain. So counsel, you have very narrow leeway. Tread cautiously.
Okay. Dr. Kwan, despite all of that, you concluded that the pesticides were the sole cause of Mr. Petrillo's death. Am I right?
Yes.
I want to talk about why that might be. You're a member of the board of directors of Doctors for Organic Solutions, right?
Yes.
That organization advocates against the use of chemical pesticides, right?
Yes, they do.
You believe that chemical pesticides are a scourge to the environment and to humans.
Absolutely, as demonstrated by this case.
That's right, sir. You believe that this case proves your point.
Well, certainly proves the science behind it. I mean, Genesis ingested this pesticide and it killed him.
In fact, you're hopeful that this case will convince legislators to limit or outright ban the use of chemical pesticides. Am I right?
Absolutely. I hope nobody has to meet the same fate that Genesis did. It's just terrible.
Thank you, doctor. I have nothing further on.
Thank you, counsel. Redirect examination.
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. You are excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff calls Samantha Arnold to the stand.
Counsel, you may proceed at will.
Good morning. Could you please state your name for the court?
I believe that you might be unmuted, or you might be muted.
My problem. I'm sorry.
No worries. No worries. I'm surprised it's gone this long that we have had an issue. Continue.
Samantha Arnold, but most people call me Sam. Forgive me, I was having some technical difficulties with my audio.
No worries, counsel.
And Sam, why are you here today?
I was the caterer for the wedding of Genesis and Casey.
And how did you get into cooking?
Well, it was the monthly meeting for my stepmom's book club. She's only 23 and she couldn't figure out how to use the stove. I always loved watching our home chef cook, and I just had a natural talent for it. I single-handedly saved book club, and I've just been into it ever since.
So what do you do for a living, Sam?
I am what they call a world-renowned chef. Well, like in Midlands. I own my very own catering company where I am the executive chef, naturally. I also have previously worked for Harper at Peony.
And what kind of experience do you have in this field?
Well, the best experience, of course. Perry was such a great place to learn. My work is the literal best that Daddy's money could buy. I've been acclaimed by critics everywhere. They give my food like 6 out of 5-star reviews. This is my passion, and I couldn't picture myself doing anything else, besides being an heiress back in Paris.
Now, Samantha, how did you first come into contact with Miss Martini and Peony Estates?
Well, originally I met Harper at their 1-year anniversary party of Peony. I was catering and they totally fell in love with my food. That night was amazing. My business exploded and my business has just been on the up and up ever since.
And how did you first come to know Genesis and Casey?
Harper did themselves the great favor of asking me to cater Genesis and Casey's wedding and dress rehearsal. It was a great opportunity to exploit the potential of my business because weddings are the pinnacle of catering opportunities. The smart businesswoman in me just could never have ever passed up this opportunity.
And how involved was Harper in the wedding process?
Well, from my experience, they were a total momzilla. They were completely super involved in every little detail of the wedding, especially when it came to Genesis.
How was Harper involved when it came to Genesis?
All they did was fight and fight over Casey and over every little thing about the wedding. From what I heard, it sounded like they hated each other. Harper was just at their boiling point with him. I could always feel their tension.
Were there any conversations between you and Harper about Genesis that you found odd?
Well, there were many instances that were weird, but one tidbit stood out to me because it dealt with my food and drink.
And what was that?
It was Harper. They gave me a bottle of wine called Cara that was specifically reserved for Genesis. They said they were giving Genesis something special, something that would take care of their problems forever.
And Miss Arnold, was that the last time that Harper talked to you about Genesis?
No, there was another time. I saw a bottle of bug-off spray in the kitchen, and I was so annoyed to ask why it was in my kitchen, so I asked them why it was there.
And what did she tell you?
Well, they said it was to kill pests like Genesis. Then they went on to say that they were kidding, of course, but after hearing about their plan to have something special for Genesis, I don't know, it just made me feel really uneasy.
Now, the night of the rehearsal, did you end up giving Genesis that bottle of special wine?
Yeah, I did. Now looking back, I think I shouldn't have, but Harper helped me with my start, Daddy always told me not to bite the hand that feeds you.
What do you mean by that, Samantha?
Harper, they were the reason my business blew up, but I had already felt uneasy about the wine based off of what they said before. But then they gave the bottle to me and told me to make sure that Genesis was alone when he drank it. At the moment, I just wanted to chalk it up to not wanting to share a good bottle of wine, but now I'm not so sure.
Then what happened?
Well, you know as much as I do. I got that super awful call the next morning, and Genesis went to the hospital, and he died.
And finally, Samantha, to your knowledge, were there any traces of pesticides in your food?
Oh my goodness. Of course not. No, there never has been and there never will be.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Miss Arnold.
Good morning.
So you arrived at Peony Estates at 11 a.m. on the day of the rehearsal wedding. That's correct, right?
Yes, that is correct.
And when you arrived, you went to the kitchen and met Miss Martini.
Yes, that is correct.
All right, and she was dealing with the wine bottles at the time.
Yes.
And you saw some of the bottles, most of them were labeled Horizon, and the one specifically labeled Cara.
That was the one they told me to specifically reserve for Genesis.
Yes, so it was for Mr. Petrillo, right?
This is correct.
All right. You also claim that there was a container of pesticides on the counter. Is that right?
Yeah, why would they put pesticides in a kitchen? It was my kitchen. That was, oh, okay. Yeah, they did it. They did that.
Yes, but you don't know exactly if there were pesticides in that container, correct?
I mean, yeah, I was asking why they had it in there, and it said to kill pests like Genesis. I don't think they would spray it with an empty bottle.
All right, but the container could have been empty. You didn't check it for its contents.
No, I didn't open it up and look to see if there were bug off spray in it.
You didn't check to make sure that it was actually pesticides within the container?
I mean, it was labeled pesticides. I don't think they would put anything else in it.
All right, but to answer my question, you don't know exactly for sure that there were pesticides within that container.
I guess not.
All right, thank you. To be clear, you never saw Miss Martini put anything in the bottles of wine, correct?
No, I never saw her do that.
All right, and you know, as the day progressed, you had many other things to do, right?
Well, yeah, I had a lot of things to do with my food and my drink.
Yeah, exactly. For the majority of the time, you were focused on your catering.
Yeah, for the majority of the time that Harper wasn't bickering at me.
And you were not focused on what people were drinking that evening, right?
Besides the whole thing with Genesis, no.
So you never saw any of the wedding guests drink from that bottle of Cara wine?
No. When I tell you Harper pulled me to the side and told me to make sure Genesis drank that alone. Nobody else drank that.
But you never saw Genesis drink any of that Cara wine?
No.
So you cannot name, to be clear, you cannot name one person that night that you saw drink that Cara wine. Specifically, you never saw Mr. Petrillo drink any of that wine.
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
Counsel.
Yes, I just want to make it clear that Mrs. Arnold, my apologies, although was told to give the bottle of wine to Genesis, never actually saw Genesis consume any of that wine.
Your Honor, my witness has
important to this
testified to this account at least 3 times already. I would just ask that opposing counsel would move on.
I'm going to sustain the objection. I believe that it's on the record, counsel.
Yes. So to conclude, you would agree that you gave the bottle of wine, you walked away. That was the end of your experience with this wine.
Yeah. I mean, he was alone when I gave it to him, so I guess I kind of followed Harper's orders.
All right. Well, thank you. No further questions.
Any redirect examination, counsel?
No, Your Honor. I would just ask that my witness be allowed to step down.
She may. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything further from the plaintiffs?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
All right, now is it customary that we take a break in between cases in chief in our new virtual style? If anyone would like a break, I would be happy to grant a recess for a few moments.
Yes, the defense would like to request a break.
Sure. I mean, typically in the real world, we would do 5 minutes, but I have no idea what is customary now. Does either counsel have a preference for how long we go?
5 minutes is fine with the plaintiff.
5 minutes as well.
Recess for 5 minutes. It is 11:37 now. Let's go ahead and make it 8 because I don't like weird numbers. We're going to say 11:45. We will adjourn.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you.
All right, so let's bring this court back to order. It is 11:45, and I believe that we have a defense case in chief to begin. Counsel for the defense, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. We call Dr. Kwan to the stand. Sorry, Dr. Cannon to the stand.
You may proceed at will, counsel. Is plaintiff's counsel ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Good morning. My name is Dr. Robert Cannon.
What do you do for a living, Dr. Cannon?
Currently, I'm an associate consultant for Gardner Consulting, where I work on cases in both toxicology and medicine.
What's your educational background?
I got my bachelor's degree from The Ohio State University in chemistry, and then I went to med school where I got my medical degree with an emphasis in toxicology.
So you mentioned toxicology. What is that?
Toxicology, it's the study of toxins or different chemicals that can cause bodily functions to slow down or even cease.
Where have you worked in the past?
Well, I started as the director of toxicology at Massachusetts General, worked there for 9 years. Then for 10 years, I was a professor of toxicology at Midlands State University, or Midlands Medical School. And for the past 5, I've been an associate consultant at Gardner Consulting.
And have you ever published anything in your field?
I have. I've actually written 50 articles about toxicology and medicine.
Have you testified in court before?
Yes, I've testified in 35 cases prior to this one.
All right, now bringing us to today, how did you get involved in this case?
For this case, I was asked to assess the work of Dr. Jimin Kwan regarding the death of Genesis Petrillo.
And how do you go about assessing another doctor's findings?
I conduct what's called a comparative analysis, and that's where I take the original doctor's conclusions and I compare them to the standards in the field of toxicology and in medicine.
Are these methods considered reliable in your field?
Yes, they are. I've used them in all of the previous cases I've done, and it's a standard method used in consulting.
And what materials did you review?
I had all of the same materials that Dr. Kwan did. So Dr. Kwan's report, Genesis Petrillo's death certificate, multiple toxins analysis, the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez, and an analysis of a wine bottle.
Were these materials sufficient to reach your conclusions?
They were.
All right, and did you readily apply those methods to the facts and data of this case?
Yes, I did.
Dr. Cannon, what were you able to conclude about the death of Genesis Petrillo?
Objection, Your Honor. May I be heard?
You may, counsel.
Under Rule 702B, the testimony of an expert witness in order to draw conclusions must be based upon sufficient facts and data. However, Dr. Cannon has not seen or run any tests on the body of Genesis Petrillo. Moreover, he has only looked at affidavits of witness testimony, but has not spoken actually to any of the witnesses of the events of July 7th and 8th. Therefore, it is very unlikely that Dr. Cannon can draw a conclusion based on sufficient facts and data if he has not gotten any firsthand data from the witnesses or from the body of Genesis Petrillo.
May we respond?
You may.
So Dr. Cannon is here to assess Dr. Kwan's findings as a second reading through his report. He has reviewed, as he mentioned, he has reviewed the report that Dr. Kwan wrote. So he knows all the facts and data that Dr. Kwan, as we heard previous in this case, knows and has talked about. He has reviewed the affidavits of Angel Rodriguez, all the toxicology reports, Petrillo's death certificate, and he's here today to talk about his reading of another doctor's findings.
So counsel, both counsels, just so I'm clear, this doctor did not review any of the actual physical evidence, such as the body test results, chemicals, or anything of that nature throughout the course of his investigation. Is that correct?
That is correct. However, he is not here to testify on what he saw and what he physically was there to examine. He was here to testify on Dr. Kwan's reports and the way that Dr. Kwan had assessed the the evidence that he found about the death of Genesis Petrillo.
Now, remind me, counsel, what was the question you asked? Defense counsel, what was your question?
The question that we asked, we were just responding to the plaintiff saying that that Dr. Cannon was not shown the proper facts and data of this case when in fact he was, because he is here to talk about Dr. Kwan's assessments of the death.
I just mean in your examination, what was the question you were asking that was objected to?
The question that was asked was, Dr. Cannon, what were you able to conclude about Genesis Petrillo's?
Sure. Plaintiff's counsel, I'll give you one more chance to speak further on this issue of 702 final work.
Yes, Your Honor. As defense counsel has stated, she asked Dr. Cannon to draw conclusions of Genesis Petrillo, but yet if Dr. Cannon has not gotten any firsthand knowledge and is only looking at the secondhand knowledge of another doctor, he doesn't have any firsthand contact with the body, has not run any tests, and has only looked at affidavits without having any contact with anybody who was on the scene of June 7th and 8th. Therefore, under 702, his conclusions as to anything to do with Genesis Petrillo about his death is not admissible under 702.
Plaintiff's counsel, I believe you do raise a noteworthy objection. Defense, one more response.
The facts and data of this case, as designated in Rule 702, the facts and data we are talking about is Dr. Kwan's conclusions on his case and his assessment. And although Dr. Cannon may have not been there in the medical room as the exams were going on for Genesis Petrillo, it doesn't mean that Dr. Kwan's report is any less of evidence and facts and data of this case. So Dr. Cannon, in reviewing this, can go through the process of Dr. Kwan, which is having another doctor review someone else's medical processes, and also review anything that perhaps Dr. Kwan left out of the report. And that is what we are here to talk about, is the problems that Dr. Kwan's assessment may have left out any specific possibilities of a cause of death.
Well, then I'm going to rule in this way because I believe that we can find an amenable middle ground. It sounds like both counsels do agree that if he were to testify directly to an analysis of the evidence in today's case, that would be outside of his sufficient facts and data and what he prepared for today's case. So, counsel, if you hear any conclusions regarding his own conclusions on the evidence itself, please re-raise an objection. For now, I'm going to overrule. But counsel, I will warn you that you know my opinion on the matter now. Please limit his testimony to his opinions of the other doctor's work, not his direct opinion on what conclusively happened in today's case. You may continue.
Of course, Your Honor. Thank you. So, Dr. Cannon, when looking at the facts and data of this case, what were other possible conclusions you could have made based on the facts and data that you read?
I was able to make two conclusions to a reasonable degree of medical certainty. First, that the pesticides present in Genesis Petrillo's body may not have come from the wine bottle. And second, that Petrillo's cause of death could have actually been from hepatic disease.
So I want to take those two ideas one by one. What do you mean that the pesticides may have come from a different source?
We don't actually know where the pesticides came from. Dr. Kwan assumed that the wine produced by Peony Estates was the source of that pesticide, but that's not actually what the evidence supports.
What does the evidence support?
Well, we know based on the toxins analysis that Dr. Kwan ordered that when Genesis Petrillo went to the hospital, there were both wine and pesticides in their stomach. But that doesn't tell us anything about when either of those two substances may have entered his stomach.
Now, how does that evidence relate to Dr. Kwan's conclusions?
Well, the problem with Dr. Kwan's conclusion was that they made a leap in judgment. He found a cause of death that was consistent with the facts, and other options were ruled out. Wine and pesticides were both found in the stomach, therefore the wine had the pesticides. But that ignores any other potential source of those pesticides.
What else could have been the source of these pesticides?
Well, there are many possibilities. Organophosphate pesticides, like the ones found in Genesis Petrillo's stomach, are commonly used in produce farming. So if a fruit or vegetable had not properly been washed and ended up at the wedding, it's very possible that the ingestion of those items could have been the source of the pesticide in Genesis Petrillo's stomach.
So what were you able to understand about Dr. Kwan's reason for the cause of death?
Dr. Kwan's cause of death required a lot of unfounded assumptions and concluded that just because one cause of death was a possibility, it was the only option. All we're able to say is that on June 8th, wine and pesticides were found in Genesis Petrillo's stomach. But that reveals nothing about the time frame of ingestion or whether the pesticides were actually the sole cause of death.
Now, I want to move on to your second idea that Genesis Petrillo's cause of death could have been from hepatic disease. What is hepatic disease?
Hepatic disease, it's also known as chronic liver disease. Now, the liver, it detoxifies the body, but hepatic disease means that if a person consumes something like alcohol, the body can't properly break it down.
Now, what happens if the body cannot properly break down alcohol?
Well, in that case, an individual can begin suffering from the effects of alcohol poisoning.
And what are these symptoms of alcohol poisoning?
Alcohol poisoning, it can lead to nausea, slurred speech, and slowed breathing. And in fact, Genesis Petrillo showed all of these symptoms while he was at the hospital.
Is there any other way to tell if someone is suffering from hepatic disease?
Yes, a sign of hepatic disease is low acetylcholinesterase levels. And that's just an enzyme that regulates the body's muscle functions.
So do you know if there were low levels of that enzyme found in Genesis Petrillo's system?
I do, based on the blood analysis that Dr. Kwan ordered. When that blood test was taken, it found low levels of acetylcholinesterase, which would be consistent with the symptoms of hepatic disease.
Do you know if Genesis Petrillo had hepatic disease?
I don't. And that's because the blood test that was performed on the morning of June 8th was the first one for Genesis Petrillo in 3 years. Hepatic disease, it can develop at any point, but not having a blood test within that range means we don't know if those low acetylcholinesterase levels were low just on that day, or if it was a long-term problem consistent with hepatic disease. Hepatic disease can appear at any point, especially in someone who, based on what I reviewed, was a heavy drinker.
What were you able to conclude about Genesis Petrillo's death and hepatic disease?
Well, I found that hepatic disease was a possible cause for Genesis Petrillo's death, and that the pesticide may have actually exacerbated the effects of the hepatic disease.
And based on everything you learned by reading all the facts and data of this case, what were you able to conclude about Genesis Petrillo's death?
Genesis Petrillo's death was complex and can't be constrained to a single explanation. We can't conclude to any degree of certainty that the wine was the source of the pesticide poisoning or that the pesticide was the cause of Genesis Petrillo's respiratory arrest. Put simply, there are just too many factors that we don't know.
Thank you, doctor. No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Cannon, you have testified in 35 cases in your career, correct?
I have, yes.
And of those cases, you have only testified for the defense, correct?
Yes, I work at a defense firm, so I only testify for defendants.
And Dr. Kwan, you are a consultant for Gardner Consulting?
Yes, that's the name of my firm.
And Detsky Roach and Rodent Killer is one of your largest clients?
We have a lot of large clients, but it is one of our major clients.
And Dr. Kwan, you were approached by the CEO of Detsky, correct?
I was.
And he told you that if your company plans on keeping their business, that pesticides could not be the cause to be found of Genesis's death?
I'm not sure if that's exactly what he said. He did talk about this case with me, but my conclusions were made independently of that conversation, and I made them independently to a reasonable degree of medical certainty.
But that is a yes to my question, correct?
Yes, we had that conversation.
Okay. And you've never published on the topics of organophosphate poisoning, correct?
On that specifically, I have not.
And also, you're being paid $50,000 for your appearance here?
Yes, I believe that's right. It's the standard rate.
And Dr. Cannon, did you not have access to speak with anyone involved in the case?
No, and that's actually normal for a consulting case to not speak with the individuals. I had sufficient data from Dr. Kwan's report and the other information that was provided to me.
And you didn't speak with anybody whose statements you reviewed?
No, I had Angel Rodriguez's affidavit, and that was sufficient.
But that's a yes to my question. You did not speak to anybody.
No, that's not normal in a consulting case.
And you also didn't have access to Genesis's body?
No, by the time that I was retained on the case, Genesis Petrillo had been cremated, so I had no access to the body, but it wasn't necessary for me to reach my conclusions.
But you didn't perform any tests on Genesis's body, correct?
No, I used Dr. Kwan's tests.
Now, Dr. Cannon, you also concluded that Genesis had no signs of hepatic disease, correct?
No, that's not actually true.
So it's your testimony that Genesis did have signs of hepatic disease.
There were many symptoms that Genesis Petrillo exhibited that were consistent with hepatic disease.
Dr. Kwan, would you be aware of if I showed you the affidavit that you presented before the court?
I would.
Okay. Your Honor, if you would give me a second to be able to set up screen sharing.
Yeah, no worries, counsel.
Now, Dr. Kwan, would you please read the line at the top of page number 4 for us, please?
Sure. It says, although I reviewed all of Petrillo's available medical records, which showed no evidence of hepatic disease, Petrillo did not have regular checkups.
Let's see. Now, moving on. And Dr. Cannon, you stated that even if she had hepatic disease, you said that the organophosphate poisoning would still be partially responsible for Genesis's death. Is that correct?
That's right.
And if Genesis ingested pesticides apart from the wine, there would have been an esophageal burn, correct?
Well, that's not exactly correct. If she had ingested it through another liquid or another food, there would not have been those burns. That's referencing direct ingestion, like directly drinking or consuming the pesticides.
But if she directly ingested the pesticides, there would have been an esophageal burn, correct?
It is possible, yes.
Which you did not find?
Dr. Kwan did not find any burns.
And the Cara wine tested positive for the organophosphate pesticides, correct?
What Cara wine are you specifically referring to?
The Cara wine produced to Genesis by Miss Martini.
I haven't seen any tests for that specific wine. Are you referring to the wine bottle that was recovered later?
Correct, the Cara wine.
So there was a bottle that was recovered, and that specific bottle did have pesticides in it, but I can't make any conclusions about when that pesticide was introduced to that bottle.
And Dr. Cannon, all other food and drink at the dinner tested negative for pesticides, correct?
The food and drink that was remaining the next day, yes.
And Doctor, you concluded that the most likely cause of Genesis's death was from the organophosphate poisoning from the Cara wine that Harper Martini produced.
Well, yes, I did think that that was the most likely cause, but Most likely doesn't mean certain, and it doesn't mean that those other causes that I mentioned can be ruled out.
But that's a yes to my question. That was the most likely cause of death.
Of all of the possible causes that could have led to Genesis Petrio's death, it was the most likely.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Any redirect examination, counsel?
No, Your Honor.
All right, Dr. Cannon, thank you. Your excuse. We're ready to proceed to our next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. We call Casey Soto to the stand.
You may proceed.
Sorry, did you say I could proceed?
You may, counsel.
Thank you. Sorry. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Sure. My name is Casey Soto.
What do you do for a living?
Now that I'm living in France, I work part-time at a local bakery just trying to make ends meet.
Do you know why you're here today?
I'm here because my parent, Harper Martini, is being sued for my fiance, Genesis's death from our wedding rehearsal in 2019.
I want to start by talking about your parent, Harper Martini. Could you tell us a little bit more about your relationship?
Sure. My dad was never really in the picture, so it's always just been her and me. My entire life. She came to all my soccer games, school plays, and everything else she could come to. She even visited me most weekends when I moved away to college. We've just always been really close.
Do you have any other family members other than Miss Martini?
Other than my late fiance, no. My mom and I are all we have as far as family goes.
I want to talk about Miss Martini's relationship with your fiance, Genesis. What was that like?
My mom and Genesis had a pretty strained relationship, but it was nothing too serious. They both had personalities that clashed often, but if it was about me, they could find a way to get along.
We've heard a lot today about your wedding. How did you and Genesis end up having it at Peony Estates?
We had originally intended to have it at a different location, but when my parent offered to have it at Peony Estates and handle all the logistics themselves, it was an offer we couldn't refuse.
Do you know if Miss Martini wanted to have your wedding at Peony Estates?
She definitely did. Aside from her role as my mother, she thought it would be a great opportunity for advertising and business expansion.
Well, how did Genesis react to that offer?
He was apprehensive at first, but when he realized that we could save money for our move to France, it became a practical decision and he was on board.
Let's talk about your wedding rehearsal. Can you tell us how that went?
It was a little bit rocky, but towards the dinner portion of the rehearsal, things had settled down.
What happened at that dinner portion?
At the rehearsal, Harper decided to give Genesis a bottle of one of her newer wines, the Cara brand. She had a custom label printed and everything, so I assumed Harper was just doing something nice.
How did Genesis react to that gift?
Genesis was confused at first, but then opened the bottle and poured it into 2 glasses.
What did you do after that rehearsal day?
I was exhausted from such a long day of planning and getting ready for the rehearsal dinner, so I decided to go to bed. I gave Genesis a kiss, headed up, and was going to go to sleep to get to be well rested for the wedding the next day.
I want to turn to the next morning. What happened then?
The next morning, I heard that he had passed away from pesticide poisoning. I never had the chance to make it to the hospital in time.
Ms. Soto, I want to be very specific about what you did and didn't see the night before Mr. Petrillo passed away. From what you could see, was the wine that Miss Martini gave Genesis opened or closed when it was handed to him?
It was closed. He poured it right in front of me.
Do you have any idea how Genesis was poisoned?
I have no idea.
Did you ever see Miss Martini or anybody else put anything in Genesis's drinks?
Absolutely not. If I had seen anybody tamper with Genesis's drink, I never would have let him drink from it.
You mentioned earlier that Miss Martini wanted to use your wedding for advertising their new wine brand as well. Do you know if that advertising ever happened?
It definitely did not. After everything that happened with the estate and the lawsuit, my mom made sure to pour all of her new wine down the drain. She was never able to advertise it.
Do you know if that wine brand was important to Peony Estates' business?
From what I could tell, it was. Peony Estates seemed to be having some financial issues, and the business that she would have, or that they would have gained from the wedding and the new wine was supposed to be the solution for that. But because of everything that happened, my mom was never able to get out of that financial situation.
Thank you. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Casey. So you talked a little bit about your relationship with Harper, but you would say Harper was pretty controlling growing up. Is that right?
Maybe you could look at it that way. We just had a really close relationship, and she was just always involved in my life.
But that's a yes to my question. You would say she was pretty controlling.
I suppose so, but most kids probably think their parents are.
And aside from you, as you said, Harper doesn't have any family.
Nope, just her and me.
And they would constantly say things to you like, "You're all I have left." Is that right?
Yep.
And you would say that sometimes Harper can take things too far.
I guess so.
Now, I want to transition to talking a little bit about the relationship between Harper and your fiancée, Genesis. Harper and Genesis appeared to have problems from the first time they met. Is that right?
Yes.
And earlier you were saying that it was nothing too serious, but isn't it true that you were so worried about the nature of their relationship that you made sure the two of them didn't have to be in the same room very often?
You know, I loved both of them. I wanted to avoid conflict as much as I could. So yes, I tried to keep them separate, but you know, that was more so because I just didn't want to see them fight.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about the planning of your wedding and Harper's role in that. So your original idea and your dream was to have the wedding at the Rosie and Pedro Winery.
That was where we had originally planned, but it made more sense to have it at Peony Estates in the end.
But that's where you first met Genesis, is that right?
Yes.
And the reason that you didn't end up having it there, as you said, was because of Harper, is that right?
Well, it's because Harper was so generous in offering to pay for most of the wedding and handle all the logistics. So yes, ultimately it was because of Harper.
And so Harper became very hands-on, as you said.
Yes, that was what we had agreed to, and that's part of the reason that we had the wedding at Peony Estates.
And although you personally agreed to this handling of the wedding brought Harper and Genesis frequently into conflict. Is that right?
They had different ideas of what they wanted the wedding to look like, but ultimately we were able to find some common ground. So they did disagree, but I feel like that's typical for any type of wedding planning.
But in your words, you thought that it wasn't productive to try and find a compromise between the two. Is that right?
Not for me always, but in the end, we ended up finding a compromise because the ceremony had to be planned.
But the wedding party, you would say, was the thing that really pushed Harper and Genesis, their relationship, over the edge.
I suppose so.
Now, I want to talk about the rehearsal dinner. I want to talk about the wedding party that happened at Black Bear Casino. Now, at the beginning, you thought it was the first peaceful night in the whole wedding planning ordeal. Is that right?
Wedding planning is super, super stressful. So it was nice to be able to relax with my friends.
But you would say you were wrong about that when you look back on the night, right?
In the end, ultimately, it ended up not turning out the way I thought it would, but so yes.
And during a later meeting between yourself, Harper, Genesis, and Blair Osborne, the wedding planner, you learned that Genesis said some hurtful things to Harper. Is that right?
Yes, Genesis was drunk and had revealed that our move to France, and Harper was upset that I was leaving.
And Harper's reaction was that they screamed about needing someone to take over the family business and how terrible it would be for you and Genesis to abandon them.
Yeah, she was really upset. I was her only family, so I feel like it made sense for her to have an adverse reaction. But yeah, yes, she was upset.
And Genesis tried to apologize at this point. Is that right?
Yes, he felt bad for how things went down. That was certainly not the way we had planned on telling my mom we were moving to France.
But although he tried to apologize, you would say the damage was already done. Is that right?
Yes, unfortunately.
And at this point, Harper told Genesis, "You'd better reconsider your plans. Casey has to stay in Midlands. Whether you stay with Casey, move off to France, or end up 6 feet under, I don't care, but Casey's staying here."
She was angry and just saying things I doubt she meant. So yes, she said that, but she sometimes speaks without thinking.
Now I want to move on to the rehearsal dinner itself. You would say everything was tense that night, right?
It was a tense night, but things eventually began to calm down.
But even though you say things began to calm down, there was a point where you discussed possibly having to cancel the wedding. Is that right?
Yeah, I just didn't, there was so much stress involved with the planning and some of the tensions. I just didn't know if it was worth it. So I had thought about it.
And you expressed these thoughts to Harper. And when you told her that you might not go through with the wedding, she was ecstatic. Is that right?
Yeah, she was.
And during this conversation, Harper said things like, "Genesis is the one behind this."
She said, yeah, things along those lines, yes.
She also said, "You can't let Genesis break up our family." Is that right?
Yes, she did say that.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions at this time.
Any redirects?
There's no redirect, Your Honor. May Ms. Soto be allowed to step down?
She may. Thank you.
At this time, the defense calls Harper Martini to the stand.
You may proceed at will, counsel.
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Good morning. My name is Harper Martini.
Ms. Martini, what do you do for a living?
I am the proud owner of the Peony Estates Winery and B&B.
Can you tell us more about Peony Estates?
Sure. So Peony Estates is a winery located in the Rapid River Valley. We are one of the largest wineries in the Midlands, and we host plenty of events from wine tastings to little tours around the vineyard. We even host weddings at the estates. But what really makes us unique was our bed and breakfast component of the estates. That was my daughter's idea.
Who's your daughter?
Casey Soto. She's the light of my life. I mean, she's amazing. She's perfect. I do absolutely anything for her.
Miss Martini, do you know why you're here today?
Yes, I am being sued for battery by the plaintiff because the plaintiff claims that I poisoned Genesis Petrillo.
I want to be very clear for the members of the jury. Did you poison Mr. Petrillo?
Of course not. Sure, Genesis and I had our disagreements, but he was my soon-to-be son-in-law, the fiance to my dearest, darlingest Casey. I would never want to hurt him.
When did you first meet Mr. Petrillo?
I met Mr. Petrillo. I met Genesis in 2015 when my dear Casey had him come to our Peony Estates. From then on, Casey would bring him to the house often. Our relationship was a little rocky. Like I said, we didn't always see eye to eye. I think it's because I'm a mama bear. I've always been protective of my daughter, so seeing her with someone that I had never met before, it was scary. What if something happened to her?
Did you ever try to fix the rocky relationship you had with Mr. Petrillo?
Yes, I did, quite a few times. I tried to show my support of the relationship by throwing an engagement party, and I also invited Genesis to a lunch with just him and I. It was so important for me to build a good relationship with Genesis. After all, I wanted to get to know the person that my dearest Casey was in love with.
Why was it important for you to build a good relationship with Mr. Petrillo?
Because it made Casey happy. Almost every time that I made an effort with Genesis and tried to get along with him, she'd come up to me afterwards with this big smile and hug me. It would just remind me of when she was a little bean sprout.
Miss Martini, I want to talk about the wedding. Were you involved at all in the planning process?
Yes, I was.
Well, how were you involved?
I was the one that hired Blair Osborne and Sam Arnold because they are very good at what they do, and I thought that it would just relieve some of the stress off of the young couple. I also recommended that the wedding be at the Peony Estates, so that way the couple wouldn't run into any picky rules or crazy fees. I didn't want the relationship to be over before it ever truly got the chance to start. Plus, it gave me the chance to use the wedding as advertisement for Peony Estates.
Weddings can be difficult. Were there any problems at all?
Of course, it's a wedding. It was rocky. After all, it was their first time at the rodeo, and I wanted the process to be as smooth as possible, so I tried to help the best I could. But like any young person, they didn't want dear old mommy's help. Naturally, Genesis pushed up a lot against a lot of things too. They had different opinions on what they worked best, but that's just what happens when different people work together.
Did the tensions ease at any point during the planning process?
So the night before the wedding rehearsal, Casey had pulled me aside and asked what it was going to take for me to bury the hatchet.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay to the statements of Casey Soto about burying the hatchet.
Counsel, can you repeat the statement back to me specifically that you're objecting to?
Yes, Casey Soto says that he hopes that, or that she hopes that Ms. Martini would like to bury the hatchet with Genesis Petrillo.
Sure.
May I
Response?
respond, Your Honor?
You may.
The witness just stated that Ms. Soto asked what it would take to bury the hatchet. Therefore, this was in the form of a question, and questions don't have truth value. Therefore, this is not hearsay.
Counsel?
Yes, Your Honor, I hadn't realized that it was in the form of the question.
Counsel, do you agree that questions can't contain inherent truth value?
I disagree in this case specifically because burying the hatchet suggests that Miss Martini has the intention to do so.
Counsel, you may respond.
I believe that refers to the effect on the listener.
Then let's do it this way. Let's offer a limiting instruction to the jury that it's not going to be offered for the truth of the matter asserted. Rather, it's going to be for the effect on the listener. So we will allow the statement conditionally. And then if you believe, counsel, that that sort of frame of mind of the witness here is important, you may ask him about that. She can testify to that, but we will not offer the statement for its truth matter. So sustained in part, overruled in part. Continue.
Yes, Your Honor.
Would you like me to repeat what I was saying?
Yes.
So the night before the wedding rehearsal, Casey had pulled me aside and asked what it was going to take for me to bury the hatchet. We were the people that she loved the most, and she just wanted us to get along so she could have the best wedding ever.
How did you respond to that?
When I saw her face, she was looking at me with those cute little puppy dog eyes, and I had to agree. I mean, if getting along with Genesis meant that much to my daughter, of course I was going to do it. Anything to make her happy.
Let's talk about the night of June 7th. How did it go?
So June 7th was the night of the rehearsal dinner. The whole wedding party was finally all together, and everybody was stressed. Genesis and I were quarreling quite a bit. It was a really big, really important night. But eventually, we just let it all go to have some fun. Seeing Casey enjoy herself, that was all that mattered.
How did the night end?
Later on that night, we had some toasts and some speeches and such. Hearing my dear speak, I was in awe. I was finally starting to understand how deeply my dear was in love. It made her happy, so I was happy. That was all too solidified then when Genesis started speaking. Maybe I was wrong about him. I saw how much he cared for and loved my daughter, and I was truly happy for the two of them. I tried to mention that in my speech.
What do you mean by tried?
Well, I have a pretty dry sense of humor. So thinking back, my toast might have been taken better if I didn't try to push my jokes. I feel like it might have been taken wrong, but hey, you can't please everyone. I decided to rectify the speech later on by having a better toast, complete with gifts of different bottles of wine from Peony Estates, and giving the very first bottle of my signature wine, Cara, to Genesis as a gift and symbol of peace.
What is Cara?
Cara is a wine that I have been aging for the past year. I've tasted it a few weeks before the rehearsal, and I knew that it was ready, so I'd put it on the shelf. After talking with Casey the night before, I thought that giving the first bottle of Cara to Genesis would be the perfect way to bury the hatchet and show Casey that I truly do care about their relationship.
Is that the wine that you're being accused of poisoning?
Yes, the plaintiff claims that I put pesticides in it and then gave it to Genesis.
Miss Martini, did you put pesticides in the bottle of wine?
Of course not. The bottle of Cara was supposed to be a sign of peace. I would never hurt anyone, especially someone that my daughter loved so much. Plus, their wedding was supposed to be a way to advertise Peony Estates. With Genesis's death, Peony Estates' name is ruined because everybody thinks that our wines are contaminated.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Thank you, counsel. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Martini, I would like to begin by talking about your daughter, Casey Soto. You stated earlier that Casey's the light of your life, correct?
That is correct.
The perfect daughter?
Yes.
But her only flaw was her partner, Genesis Petrillo, right?
At first, yeah.
Because they wanted to move to France together.
Not necessarily. Genesis was such a bad influence. At one point, Genesis sent my dearest Casey to the hospital for alcohol poisoning.
But by them going to France, you thought you were going to lose your daughter, correct?
Well, when I was younger, I ran away from home, and I eventually came back to what I loved, so I figured the same would be for Casey.
But you were terrified that you were going to lose the light of your life, correct?
Of course, she was moving all the way across the world.
You even said in your deposition that you wish Casey and Genesis never met, right?
Yes, Genesis was a very bad influence for the longest time.
She was too critical on how you ran Peony Estates.
Yes, it was bad for business.
But you did try to bury the hatchet, right?
Yes.
But let's talk about that speech that you mentioned before. During the rehearsal dinner, you called Genesis a problem child in front of the entire wedding party.
That is true, but like I said, I have a really dry sense of humor, and that joke just didn't stick with the audience.
And there was another event, the lunch that you had with Mr. Petrillo, where you wrote a note afterwards because you were so upset with how the conversation had gone.
Yes.
Would you recognize this note if I were to show it to you today?
I would.
Sorry, I'm just trying to screen share this. Give me a second.
No worries, counsel.
Oh, okay. Sure. Ms. Martini, is this your signature at the bottom of the note?
Yes, it is.
Ms. Martini, could you read aloud sentences 2, 3, 4, and 5?
The wedding can't happen. I need you out of our lives. Leave Casey, and the enclosed $300,000 is yours. Otherwise, I will take you out of the picture the hard way.
Can you also read, can you just read to the end of the note, please?
Objection, Your Honor. This document hasn't been entered into evidence.
Yeah, counsel. Are you going to be offering this into evidence, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yeah, let's do that first. So we will retroactively redact all of the testimony that has been read aloud until we offer this into evidence. So let's do that first, counsel.
Your Honor, may I offer this into evidence now?
Are there any objections?
No objections.
All right. And now we will retroactively unredact or unstrike the record. Everything is back on. This has been admitted, and you may proceed, counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. Can you just read the last 2 sentences of the note, please?
Don't make it come to that. You have till the 7th. Choose wisely.
Sorry, is there an objection? Okay. Now, Ms. Martini, I would like to move on to June 7th, 2019. You tried to patch things up with a bottle of Cara wine that you presented to Genesis.
Yes, it was something that meant so much to me. It was the culmination of my business, and I wanted to represent that with the bond to someone as close to Casey.
Ms. Martini, you stored this bottle of wine in the kitchen where pesticide was present, correct?
I kept the wine where I keep all of our other wines.
Ms. Martini, are you aware that Genesis was killed by the exact same pesticide that you use at Peony Estates?
I was not aware of that.
Additionally, Ms. Martini, you requested that Genesis be the only one to drink the wine, and when she does so, to drink it alone.
Yes, just so that she had time to think about how good our future together as parent and son-in-law could be.
Ms. Martini, you heard Mr. Rodriguez say Genesis got poisoned, or before Mr. Rodriguez had told you that Genesis had been sent to the hospital, you said Genesis got poisoned? Oh no, we'll have to cancel the wedding. Go tell Casey. Casey needs to know. Sorry, I believe my time is up. No need to answer that question. No further questions.
I'll allow final answer.
Okay. And Ms. Rodriguez, nobody had told you that Genesis had been poisoned before you said to Mr. Rodriguez, Genesis got poisoned? Oh no, we'll have to cancel the wedding. Go tell Casey. Casey needs to know.
Like I've said before, I have a dry sense of humor, and that was just a really poorly timed joke. Of course, I didn't know what was happening.
Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Anything further?
Nothing further. I just asked that my witness be excused.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Martini. You are excused.
Thank you.
Would either closing counsel like a brief moment before we proceed to closing arguments, or are we ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. Could we get 5 or 10 minutes, depending on what opposing counsel would like? I'm fine with 5. If we want 10, that's cool too.
Either is fine with me, counsel.
I guess it's up to you, Your Honor.
Isn't it always?
We can do, since you don't like
we'll,
the odd numbers, we can do 12:40. 8 minutes?
I appreciate that, counsel. Let's do 12:40. All right, it is 12:40. Are we ready to proceed with closing arguments?
The defense is ready, Your Honor.
All right, you may proceed.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may, counsel.
Harper was at her boiling point. As you have heard in today's trial, this mother loved her daughter so much she was willing to do anything not to let her go. Time and time again, Harper showed how far she was willing to go to keep Genesis out of Casey's life. As she said in Genesis on the napkin, I will take you out of the picture the hard way. And you have till the 7th. Choose wisely. And it all came to a head on June 7th when Harper reached her boiling point. June 8th should have been the best day of Genesis's life. He never made it down the aisle. He never took another breath. That is why we, the plaintiff, have filed a claim against Harper for battery. That means we had the burden of proof, and the judge will tell you that we had to meet that burden today as a preponderance of the evidence. Or in other words, more likely than not. Members of the jury, we had to prove 3 things today. First, Harper Martini intentionally mixed pesticides into that wine. Second, when Harper put those pesticides into the wine, it was her intent to cause harm. And thirdly, when Genesis drank that wine, she died as a result. Ladies and gentlemen, we have met that burden here today. We have shown to you that Harper reached her boiling point, poisoned Genesis, and Genesis died as a result. First, you heard the testimony of Angel Rodriguez, who told you exactly what happened the night of June 7th and 8th. You heard how Harper hated Genesis and how she had reached her boiling point. Harper fought with Genesis while planning the wedding, during the rehearsal dinner, and fought with her hours before his death. You heard Harper threaten Genesis that night, saying, I will make you disappear. Folks, look what happened. Harper made Genesis so scared that she told Angel, I'm afraid Harper is going to kill me. Moreover, ladies and gentlemen, you heard how Genesis was the only person to drink from the poison bottle of Care wine, except for Angel, who had 1 sip and spit it out because it didn't taste right. Angel testified that although Genesis was drinking, her symptoms that had progressed throughout the night were not consistent with the amount of alcohol she had consumed. And also, nobody got any poisoning from the food. Only Genesis, only from the wine. Secondly, you heard the testimony of our expert witness, Dr. Kwan, a specialist in toxicology that was Genesis's doctor in the ER. He testified that the extreme and specific symptoms Genesis was having that night lined up with the symptoms expected from somebody who had been poisoned by an organophosphate, which are present in pesticides. Likewise, Dr. Kwan testified that he tested the blood, tested the wine, and found the exact same organophosphate poison. He told you how Genesis died. She was poisoned, he was poisoned, and poisoned by those pesticides. Finally, you heard the testimony of Harper's own employee and the caterer of the wedding, Sam Arnold. She detailed how Harper was consistently fighting with Genesis and how Harper was clearly at her boiling point. Harper had a plan, as she stated, something that would take care of their problem forever. You heard how Harper specially reserved that deadly Cara wine for Genesis and Genesis only. Moreover, you learned that when Sam saw a bottle of pesticides in the kitchen and asked Harper what it was for, Harper didn't say it was to take care of the insect infestation. Rather, Harper said it was to kill pests like Genesis. Casey was the light of Harper's life. Harper was not willing or ready to let her daughter go. She fought with Genesis for years, and she was willing to do whatever it took to keep her daughter in her life. Ladies and gentlemen, to keep her daughter in her control. On June 7th, Harper saw that Casey was slipping away and did the only thing she could think of to keep Casey around. She reached her boiling point. We have proven to you that Harper intended to harm Genesis and did so on June 7th. Members of the jury, there is only one reasonable verdict that you can find. Find the defendant, Harper Martini, liable of battery. Thank you.
Thank you, plaintiff's counsel. Defense counsel.
Your Honor, can I ask my timekeeper to turn on her camera so I can see the time?
Sure thing.
Okay. I think it's upside down. Is it upside down? Just making sure. Okay. All right, may I proceed? May I proceed, Your Honor? Sorry. Just making sure.
Yes, you may.
Great, thank you. May it please the court. When opposing counsel gets up here and tells you that Harper Martini reached her boiling point, it may sound nice, it may sound compelling, but it's missing evidence. And the reason that it's missing evidence is because not every tragedy has a villain. Now we agree. What happened to Genesis Petrillo on June 7th of 2019 was a tragedy. What happened to Genesis Petrillo shouldn't have happened. We agree. But where we disagree is with who's at fault in this case. See, when opposing counsel just got up here a moment ago, they tried to convince you that it was all Miss Martini's fault and that Miss Martini was the villain in today's case. But by itself, those words are just that, words. It wasn't enough for opposing counsel to just get up here and say that Miss Martini poisoned Genesis Petrillo. They had to prove it. In today's case, opposing counsel and the plaintiff are suing Harper Martini for something called battery. It's their claim that Harper Martini intentionally poisoned Genesis Petrillo's wine using pesticides, and that because of that, Genesis Petrillo died from pesticide poisoning. Now that's a bold claim. And when you make a claim like that in a court of law, you can't just say it. You have to prove it. It was the plaintiff's burden to prove by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning more likely than not, that Harper Martini intended to harm Genesis Petrillo by putting pesticides in their wine. They have to prove each and every element of their case by that standard. And if they fail to prove even one of those elements, they failed to meet their burden. And members of the jury, let's be clear, the plaintiff has failed to meet their burden today. And so let's walk through all the ways that the plaintiff failed to do that. In today's case, first, how Miss Martini didn't have anything to do with Genesis Petrillo's death. Second, how no one in this courtroom can prove that the wine was the source of the poison. And third, how Genesis Petrillo may have died from something other than pesticide poison. First, how Miss Martini had nothing to do with Genesis Petrillo's death. Despite all the fingers that the plaintiff pointed at them today, Miss Martini themselves took the stand today, looked you in the eye and told you that they did not poison Genesis Petrillo. Miss Martini told you that despite their differences, they actively tried to support their daughter and heal their broken relationship with Genesis Petrillo. You learned that Miss Martini wanted to give Genesis Petrillo a bottle of a special brand of wine as a peace offering, not as a vehicle for poison. And members of the jury, you don't even have to take Miss Martini's word for it. Think about the testimony of Casey Soto, someone who has nothing to gain from this case. Casey Soto told you that Miss Martini wanted to use the wedding as a business opportunity. And as a result of Genesis Petrillo's death, Miss Martini didn't get to do that. Members of the jury, we know that Miss Martini didn't do this because it doesn't make any sense for her to have. Let's talk about the plaintiff's second failure, the failure to prove that the wine was actually the source of the poison. Because members of the jury, this is one of the most important parts of this case. And the plaintiff has done nothing to prove it. Think about it. After hearing from 6 witnesses over the course of today's trial, not a single one of them told you that the bottle of wine that Genesis drank had any poison in it. The only witness that the state brought to try and prove that point was Dr. Kwan. So I want to talk about Dr. Kwan's testimony for a moment, because let's be real. Dr. Kwan got up here and told you that they knew virtually nothing about this case. And when I got up to cross-examine Dr. Kwan, I asked the questions that we needed to know the answers to. I asked him, did the pesticide antidote work? No. Do you know when Genesis Petrillo ingested those pesticides? No. Do you know how those pesticides ended up in his system? No. Do you know if the pesticides were in the wine or in the food? No. Do you know if they were ingested on purpose or accident? No. Do you know if another person put those pesticides in his food? No. Do you know if Harper Martini put those pesticides in his food? No. On cross-examination, it became clear that Dr. Kwan was just guessing about the pesticides being in the wine. The members of the jury, guesses aren't evidence. Remember that it's not our job to prove that the pesticides were in the wine that Genesis Petrillo drank. It's the plaintiff's job and Dr. Kwan's job to prove that it was. And they haven't. So we can't assume that Dr. Kwan, like Dr. Kwan wants us to. But you also heard from another expert in today's case who had the same evidence that Dr. Kwan did, except his analysis was more thorough and it was complete. He told you that it was reckless to assume that the pesticides came from the wine, because that claim isn't backed by the science in this case. He told you how Dr. Kwan's logic was flawed, and that just because the wine was found in Genesis Petrillo's system along with pesticides, that isn't enough to say that it was the source of the pesticides. And that brings me to my last point. The fact that Genesis Petrillo may have died from something other than pesticide poison. Dr. Cannon told you flat out that Dr. Kwan didn't take all the possible symptoms into account. He didn't take into account all the possible causes of death either. Dr. Kwan says that this was caused by pesticides, and that it may have been, but Dr. Cannon tells you that it may have been caused by alcohol poisoning or chronic liver disease. Dr. Cannon pointed out that Genesis Petrillo had low levels of a specific enzyme in their blood tests, which could have been an indicator of that type of liver disease. Unlike the plaintiff's expert, Dr. Cannon pointed out, and he made it clear, that he looked at all of the possible reasons for Genesis Petrillo's death. At the end of the day, the plaintiff's case rests on you, the members of the jury, making leap after leap after leap in logic. When their case is riddled with I don't know after I don't know after I don't know, and they fail to provide even the smallest amount of evidence to back their claims, it becomes clear what's going on with their argument. It becomes clear that it's not just the lack of evidence that's the problem. It's the recklessness of their claim today. They failed to meet their burden because without any proof, they tried to paint Harper Martini as the villain behind Genesis Petrillo's death. But members of the jury, we know that that's not what happened. We know that the evidence and the facts don't show that. We know that this tragedy doesn't have a villain. And that's why we ask you to find Harper Martini not liable for battery. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Is there rebuttal?
Your Honor, may I inquire as to how much time I have left?
Sure.
Um,
Timekeeper. Do we have a timekeeper that knows how much time there is remaining for plaintiff's closing argument?
In the chat, the defense's timekeeper stated that we have 1 minute and 22 seconds remaining.
Okay. Thank you. May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Ladies and gentlemen, not every tragedy has a villain, but this one does. You heard that the wine was poisoned, containing organophosphates from pesticides. Ladies and gentlemen, opposing counsel's own expert witness, said that the most likely cause of Genesis's death was from the organophosphate poisoning found in the car wine that was produced by Harper Martini. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard how Harper Martini hated Genesis. Time and time again, she showed how she had reached her boiling point. She showed how she was the villain of this tragedy. Ladies and gentlemen, there is only one reasonable conclusion: that Harper Martini, more likely than not, was the villain of this tragedy. Ladies and gentlemen, find Harper Martini liable of battery. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Well, with that, we are now at the conclusion of today's trial. Give Judge Mason and I a second to complete our ballots, our rankings of attorneys and witnesses. We can send those off to the tournament director. And then if you all would like, I'm sure Judge Mason has comments from his secret hiding spot in the back of Zoom. And then I also would be happy to give comments as well, if you all would like. I know it obviously is early in the season, so I feel like that would be useful. But if you all would also like to just go on your merry way, I competed, so I know what it's like to have to sit here and listen to people you don't know tell you how lovely or terribly you did. So just let me know if you would like to hear constructive feedback. I would love to do so. But just give us a couple minutes to finish up our ballots. All right, everyone. I believe we are fully submitted. If everyone would like to turn your videos on, that would be great. I will not compel you to do so, but we would obviously like to see everybody. We can have a great conversation. I believe this is still live streaming, so remember that. Don't say anything your family would not want you to say. And I will let Judge Mason introduce himself, begin, because I've been talking a lot, and then I can let you all know who I am.
Perfect. Y'all can hear me, right? Cool. Well, I guess I want to start off by saying, as always, good job. First round of the tournament is in the books. I suspect that's the case for all of you guys. And then one other point, I don't believe in the judges that give you just 9s and 10s, or like where you like really just can't tell what was good and what was not. So I do start my ballot off at a 5 and move up and down accordingly. So just know if you get a 5 on something, or perhaps like a 6 or a 7, please don't be upset by it. I treat a 5 as what I think I would expect from an average part of the trial. I kind of want to point out a couple things I did like. For example, the plaintiff's expert, I think it was Quan, like I really believed you the entire time. Especially on cross, like you didn't feel like you fought when you didn't need to. You were more than happy to answer yes when the question really wasn't important, or when you weren't really getting attacked. And the defense opener, I also really liked the way that you presented yourself and the way that you spoke and the way that you asked questions. One bone to pick, and this is with both teams, and it is specifically on the defense expert. So y'all got an objection or made an objection for 702. And at the end of this objection, Judge Worrell ruled that he did not want the expert to come to any sort of conclusions about the cause of death, rather just to stick to conclusions about what the plaintiff's expert did or did not do correctly. And then if my memory serves me right, my notes serve me correct, the very next question y'all gave was asking for conclusions about a cause of death. You shouldn't do that. You should really listen to the judge. Judge Worrell was like really nice and explained exactly what his rulings meant. So he didn't just sustain or overrule. He kind of explained and kind of walked you through to make sure that you wouldn't make those mistakes. And then to pick on the other side, I believe it was Bo, Mr. Marlett. You also didn't object to it. And I probably would have been kicking and screaming, for the next like 4 or 5, even all the way to the end of the direct to object to that. But otherwise, I think a good job. I think most of the attorneys did a really good job of controlling their witness, and I was very happy with how y'all did for the first round.
Sweet. Thank you, Mason. Did you introduce who you are? Do you want to tell them that?
Yes. My name's Mason. I competed at Furman University for 4 years, and I am currently a 1L at Georgia State Law.
Well, hey everybody, my name is Austin Worrell. I competed at Miami University 4 years, and I was honored to be part of our national championship team in 2018, where we won the final round. It was an awesome experience, and regardless of what year you're at now, you can make it there. I never thought we would, so keep working hard, and it can happen. But mock trial is an amazing experience, and I've loved every part of it. I loved this round today. You all did a great job. And I mean that seriously. I don't give that compliment lightly. I was very impressed, especially with Zoom. You guys did an incredible job adapting. I am also currently a 1L at USC Gould in Los Angeles, although I'm in Ohio right now, but I will be moving out there soon. I have some comments. Besides the good ones that you all adapted well, I think just global comments would be just think about how you are coming across on video, which is obviously a whole new beast that you have to tackle. But I think we have some characters who you might come across well in a courtroom if you are having a more, sort of a more negative style or sort of a lesser emotion that might not come across very well on camera. So just think about that. I'm not saying everyone has to be all happy and cheery on camera because that comes across well, but make sure that if you're a little more toned down, that you still are bringing up your volume and tone so that that comes across. Just be careful about that. It's a new challenge that I never had to deal with. So good luck to everybody with that. I would also say just because of the fact that I have and the judges have the bench book and on all the exhibits, feel free to use things on camera. You don't have to screen share every time you have an exhibit. You can hold things up like you would in a courtroom. In fact, I would highly recommend that, you use them. Pretend like you are actually in a court. I mean, it's very similar. Yes, you can't hand it to me physically, but if you're in a courtroom, you would just hold up exhibits and say, you have your affidavit right here and you said X, or in a closing argument, you would say, look at this note that says that, she wanted to kill people or whatever, you can use all of those still. So don't allow Zoom to inhibit you from doing things that you probably should be doing. And I think that's a global comment that I would have as well. I know it's early, but you have evidence, use it. I was a little saddened to see such a low use of exhibits and such when I think that you have a great opportunity to use it more. I don't have any experience with this case at all. I'm not coaching this year, so I really have no idea. So I commend you all for allowing me to understand it pretty easily, but also I would say it was still fairly unclear. So use more exhibits, be very careful about relationships and such. Please don't use gender neutral words if we know that the person is here and they have a gender that they have decided to use. If they haven't decided to use it, please use a gender neutral pronoun. But if they have, that is helpful. Instead of saying my parent, you could say my mom or dad if that has been decided. If it is not, obviously I understand we're going to use gender neutral pronouns. But if it has been, please use the appropriate words so that way we know, or use their name, for example, so that we know the relationship so that we can connect all those people together. It's just helpful for those of us who don't know the case very well or haven't read it before. I would also say there was a lack of speculation objections all over the place. I feel like people were speculating to what everybody else felt and thought all day long. And that's just an easy one to make, right? The judges are probably going to sustain every single time. When you feel like somebody doesn't like you, I would have sustained those all day. I mean, how do you know that? Is that based on hearsay? What evidence is there of that? And that was key for, both sides' interpretation of what happened. So be careful with those, because I definitely think you'll probably get those moving forward. I love the 702. I'll echo Mason said it perfectly. Some judges are not going to be as forthcoming as I was in explaining the ruling. So please just make sure you key in to what the judges say. And then on that as well, I know it's early, but colloquialisms are not going to be okay in a court of law. So that's cool. That's real. That's, whatever. Be careful with how you're speaking to judges. Thankfully, I am not a real lawyer, a real judge, so I didn't get offended, but I can guarantee you that some will. I once used the phrase "threw shade on other witnesses" as a sophomore closer. So you didn't get to that level, but be careful with your colloquialisms. I loved the expert witnesses. You both did a great job. I would say keep that up. I mean, you have some very tough terms. One of my competitive fellow teammates from my senior year is actually in med school, and she was texting me that around people were messing up the terms and how to pronounce them a lot. I don't think that's going to matter much, but try to at least keep it consistent, because I know a few of you were saying some words like differently, and that's just a little way that I'm like, oh wait, you don't actually know what that word is. Now I don't know, and I don't know the right pronunciation, so you could call it whatever you want, but just say it the same every single time. I think that the case is odd in the way that there's no real direct evidence, but I think that you all handled that fairly well. But just be careful again with the judge's ruling. Little things like the way that you're presenting yourself through Zoom. I appreciated the standing up. I thought that was great, but at the same time, it didn't bother me either way that you both kind of did it a little differently. I will say the blurry backgrounds, it was a little distracting. So just that didn't impact my score whatsoever. So don't worry about it, but just think about it. Are there better ways of doing that? Can you try to find yourselves in better places? Because while it's not going to affect me, I can guarantee you some old person that's judging you might ding you for that, because they're going to say you don't know how to use technology when they probably can't even send a text message. So just be careful. Also, don't ever agree with judges on what their rulings are. That was another note that I had, that I think that we had a little bit too much talk back and forth with the judge, and make sure we're not talking to counsel as well. Just speak to the court and allow the court to make a ruling and keep going, or question, ask the court, if you don't understand what that ruling was. Lack of foundation. There's lots of foundation that need to be laid all over the place that you guys could have objected to. So just little easy points to score, use those. And then it's early in the year, but I would say everyone work on your confidence and your assertion. You all clearly know your materials, even though it's early. I was impressed. So I think that a few of you here and there could work on just being confident, or fake it till you make it. I don't know if you don't know something because I don't know anything about this case. So, I'm sure you all know those comments, but definitely just at the end of the day, if you aren't sure what's going on, confidence is going to be what still scores you well, even if the substance isn't necessarily there. But I thought the substance for the most part was pretty great. Let's see, anything else? Maybe at the beginning, if you have some judges who are reading the packet before they start, they might be confused by the fact that there are two claims and you're only pursuing one. And so that's why I asked you, because I actually genuinely, I had heard from a friend who's coaching that you only would be pursuing one, but I actually wasn't sure. So I would say in pretrial, either if you're allowed to bring it up, or after openings, just someone make it clear to the court so that I know that we're only talking about battery or we're talking about negligence per se. That would be useful. Other than that, I think that's, I have more specific comments that I'll send in our little Google Doc. But I am curious, who all is a first year? Raise your hand. Okay, cool. Who all is a second year? Nice. Juniors? Seniors? No seniors. Wow. Oh, one senior. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's awesome. And actually, a good mix. I was trying to guess who had a lot of experience and who didn't. And actually, I couldn't really tell. So you all are in great shape.
Thank you so much for judging. Sorry, I'm the coach. I've got to make sure my team eats and gets lunch because we're on a tight time schedule. I hate to interrupt, but I have to, be the mama bear here.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much. Anyway, thank you. I really appreciate your time. Good round, everyone. Well done.
Thank you. Have a good one, guys.
I have a quick question. As a judge, would you prefer the claim to be in pretrial or during opening statements?
I would say ask your coach, because I don't know if there are rules on that. I would probably say I would have done it in pretrial if I was competing now, but I would ask your coach. Yeah.
Yeah, I would too. He wasn't there for last year. I don't know if you've done it. Was it last year or the year before we had two cases? It was last year.
Yeah. I wasn't.
I felt like it was very nice to explain at the outset what you were pursuing.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool.
Yep.
Thank you guys so much for your time today.
Really appreciate it. Good luck next round, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I liked your comments. That was good.
Thank you. You too. Yeah. I think we're still live streaming, so we can't say anything.
Too bad. We can't hate on the teams. No, but
that was funny. I feel like I was commenting too much, and I was like, oh wait, I'm doing that thing again. But
well, what I was thinking the whole time was like, wow, I've never had someone give this many comments to me, not just like be ready to tell them to be quiet and move on. Because you brought up a lot of ones that like I have in my legal pad that I just forgot to mention. Like the objections was a big one. I felt like they missed a whole bunch.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But cool. Yeah. So, master's in economics, then is that what it was?
So it's actually globalization, which is like history and economics. But yeah, so it was at the London School of Economics in London. It was really cool to go abroad for a year and now coming back and moving to London and yeah,
traveling the world. That's awesome. Because I love economics. Like, I decided to make it a additional major of mine very late because I realized that I'm tired of politics. So,
were you a political science major?
I was, yeah.
Yeah, so was I. Yeah, I wish I would have done economics instead because I feel like it's more substance behind the BS.
Yes, no, it's fun. Like I loved my political science. Like they were awesome, but I have like a special place in my heart for all the economics professors I had, and almost wanted to go get my PhD in it, but I didn't take enough math courses.
You didn't take, sorry, say that again?
Didn't take enough math courses
to
be able to go into a PhD program. So I was delayed by at least another year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah. Mine was more qualitative. Well, like entirely qualitative. So I didn't have to have the GRE to do it, which was nice. Yeah. So while I don't have sort of a quantitative background, it's fine because at law school we don't need it. So,
how hard did Danny try to get you to come judge?
It was very easy to convince. She said, will you judge? And I said, yes. And that was it.
Cool. That makes sense. We've got a lot of, heck, I think Danny might be the only coach that's not a Furman alum at Wake. Maybe.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you coaching too?
So I'm not coaching Wake. I am so Scott, the person who came in as Elliot, He
Yeah.
was the captain of my team my freshman year at Furman, and he's the head coach. Even though I
What
guess really,
schools were they? Do you know?
oh yeah, the plaintiff was one of Wake's teams, and the defense was UMBC.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, I don't know A, B, whatever it may be, and I only found out it was Wake because Scott texted me afterwards saying that we got one of their rounds.
Nice.
But
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty close, like all things
Yeah.
considered.
It was weird how they evenly were matched too, and sort of like I could tell varying experience levels, and I feel like both sides had, I didn't feel like one was like all seniors and one was all freshmen, so it was nice. Good mix. Yeah.
Yeah, but
I do feel bad for the witnesses though. I feel like it's kind of hard to figure out how to sort of be emotional or be sort of persuasive on camera, but
yeah, it's interesting. I don't know where I stand on standing up versus sitting down.
I know I couldn't, because like I appreciated both. The only thing I didn't like about standing up was that it was harder to hear. Actually, I felt like when they stood up, like the microphone a little less, and I was like, I think I would normally prefer to see you stand up just so you feel like you're doing it, like in a courtroom. But then at the same time, I was like, I could hear you less. So
yeah, we did the like when all the stuff happened, like all the teams that like I guess made it out of regionals since it all got canceled pre-orcs. We all like got invited to do like a fun like seniors only tournament, and after seeing both, the other thing is like the camera. Like I don't want to look at someone like this. Like this is not a flattering angle to see anybody.
Yeah.
And so like we have one of our coaches who like for a little high school camp that we run like gave us this whole thing like camera eye level, like told us how to put lighting so that you could like see your face, like the whole spiel.
That's what's wild to me is like you have to figure that all out now,
Yeah.
But I think it's useful because I know that some courts are going to more, at least for the pandemic, are going to more like Zoom style trials. But I could see that happening more. I don't think that's going to stay permanently, but I could see some lower level stuff. They'll just be like, we'll just do this via Zoom or whatever. I mean, so I guess it's a useful skill to know how to advocate via video.
I've also been told a lot of mediations are being done using Zoom and like using breakout rooms and stuff.
All of that just sounds like a nightmare, but also kind of cool. I mean, it was very cool to see the ballots. Did you see how yours was like just tabulated right away?
Wait, it was? Oh, I can see what my ballot said. Hold on.
Yep. We shouldn't say anything on here in case, but yeah, you could definitely see, because I didn't click out of it and I saw they have to enter in a code and then it tabulates and then you can see who won and then by how much. It's
that's
so cool.
Interesting. Does it say where? Oh, I just pulled it up. Oh, it does. Oh, that's so interesting.
Isn't that awesome?
Huh. Yeah, they did a really good job of it. That is, I don't think how it was for the seniors only tournament. They were trying to figure it all out.
Yeah.
But
I don't like, does the submit button, do you think it actually sends it to them? Or do you think that's just so that they can see in the Google Drive that it's done?
Well, so it's an Excel spreadsheet. What does your title say at the top of your document?
DD-9.
That's probably what it is. They probably have like, I mean, in like spreadsheets, they have like all the different tabs at the bottom you can create. Like mine's DD10. So like I suspect they've got like once you click submit, it like changes on like some like main sheet that they can look at.
Oh, so true. Yeah, it's probably linked to a main sheet that then has like a no to a yes or something.
Yeah, or maybe even like that's where the tab cards are.
Yeah,
I don't know, but
awesome. Because we've always talked about like how AMTA could be way techier and could have. Oh, Danny's calling me. This probably means we need to stop talking. Hello, Danny. I thought you were going to yell at us because Mason and I are still talking, and I think we're still on live stream. We're not saying anything, though. Yeah. That's funny. It was her team that we judged.
There we go. That's awesome.
So she wanted to give me negative feedback on my terrible judging.
That's fair. Well, I've gone up and visited a friend of mine who is also like one of Wake's coaches. So I suspect I will see them maybe at a practice.
That is the only bad part about this. Is like in person, it'd be really fun for us all just hang out and talk about everything. But well, someday we'll get back to it. Are you gonna coach? Just Georgia State has a team, right?
So they do, but I am like going back to my high school at the moment and like coaching them.
Yeah.
Just because, well, they kind of need some help.
Yeah.
They used to be really good, and I came back for regionals just to watch them for fun, and things have changed a lot from.
Yeah. Oh, I feel that. Yeah, I went. I tried actually to coach my high school, but they were basically like, we have enough coaches, enough attorneys who are helping. And I wanted to be like, yeah, but like, AMTA competitors, just like we know what it's like to sort of make it work. Where I feel like a lot of attorneys just they make it too real, you know. Yeah. And so I was just like, I get it. You don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. But now I'm going to try to hopefully get on board. Maybe USC. We'll see. I would love to do that. But at the same time, also 1L obviously is a lot. So I'm trying to focus on that as much as I can too. But
that's fair. I've got between that, like 1L year coaching, and I'm also like in flight training at the moment.
Oh, that's cool.
So like between those things, like I'm at about 30.
And don't you need like 100 something or 200 or
no? So you need actually the bare minimum 40. Almost no one gets it at 40. I'm going to do it. Like I've got a bet with my little sister who's a pilot and my dad who's a pilot.
Yeah.
That I'm going to get it done. But
that's awesome.
So
you only need the hundreds of hours for like commercial flying, right?
So yeah, so you probably need about 200 to like get your commercial license.
Yeah.
But like to get hired by an airline, you need, like 1,500, 2,000 hours.
Yeah.
But I'm going to law school. I just want to do it for fun.
No, I've actually, one of my friends from undergrad, he flies and I just see it on his story every day. And the other day I was like, before I die, I really want to get my license because it would just be fun to fly just like a small, prop plane and just go around low altitudes. I feel like that would be so much fun.
It is fun. That's what I do. Except normally I'm just training. I got beat up yesterday. The winds were ridiculous and I was doing everything I could just not to get blown off the side of the runway.
Does it ever get scary up there?
Up in the air, no. It's really, I mean, I guess, when you're training, your instructor will like just randomly turn off your engine, like to like make sure you know how to like what to do. But it's really just when where I'm at now, it's like when the conditions are bad and like, I guess the best way I can put it is if the wind's coming to the side of the runway, your airplane might be pointed this way, but you're actually tracking like straight down the runway.
Oh.
But you can't like land the plane like that because as soon as the wheels hit the ground, you'll just run off the runway. So like there are like techniques you can do to like kick the nose out, but not like just get drifted all the way off the side of the runway. And that's when it gets scary for me, at least.
I'm sure. Yeah. I feel like that's a lot of imprecise calculating that, could really go wrong if you do it the wrong way. But I guess the whole pilot's instinct thing just is really a real thing, right? I mean, it's those situations you just have to kind of know what has worked before.
And it makes me feel like so terrified driving on the road because I know how little you have to know to drive a car and how much you have to know if you want to get in the air.
So true. I mean, I was even just driving the rain the other day and my car started to swerve a bit. And I remember I was thinking, I technically don't know. Like, I feel like you're supposed to turn the wheel like the opposite way because then your wheels go like this. And then I think it decreases the surface area, increases it, and it should make you go in the right direction. I think. I can't remember if that's correct, but I was just thinking like, yeah, they really don't train us for all circumstances. And we could probably avoid so many car accidents and lawsuits if we actually just trained our drivers a little better. But
And like, I mean, you have to know how your airplane works. Like, I know I learned more about like a 4-cylinder piston engine while I'm getting my pilot's license than I do like ever driving, the 4 or 5 years I've been driving.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah. Well, I definitely want to do it at some point. How hard is it to get like the process started? Or is it state by state? Maybe I don't know what it's like.
No,
but-
it's national. It's
National,
so it's really not too hard. The only problem with it is expensive.
Hmm.
So like definitely something that you would. It's like I'm lucky. My dad has 2 piston like airplanes.
Yeah.
That we like lease back to the flight school, and so like I get to do it for a lot cheaper than like someone like you might do it for.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like you could call up a flight school, like just whatever's nearby, whatever airport's nearby, and like ask for like I think they call them demo flights, where they'll like take you up and show you around, show you like what it's actually like.
Wow.
And I like my family, we would bring our like family, friends, anyone who wants to go up. We love just bringing them up, fly over a really big lake in Atlanta and have fun.
Sounds great.
But anyway, I'm going to go and try and snack some food before this next round.
So am I. Is it actually going to start at 2:30, do you think?
Oh, 2:30. I thought it was 2.
No, I thought the original email said 2:30.
The one I've got from Elliot on Thursday says 2. I have not received.
Well, thank you for telling me that. Then, yeah, I had in my mind 2:30 for some reason.
Yeah, but I'm just gonna go reheat some food. But it was fun judging. You were a good judge. I gave you high praise to Scott, and then Scott told me that you went to Miami, and I was like, okay, well this all adds up.
Danny's calling me again, so I better go. But great to meet you. I'll add you on socials, and I'll definitely ask you about the pilot stuff. That's awesome.